Chapter 38. The giant rotten beast raised its claw, which was almost half the height of a human, and slapped down. Brando ducked to avoid it. The wind stirred up by the twig swept past his head like a blade and hit a piece of rock. With a boom, the rock was sent flying 20 to 30 meters away. Brando watched as the rock changed direction 3 times in the air and finally got stuck in a pile of sharp rocks, raising a cloud of dust. He couldn't help but be shocked. This power was too frightening. If a person was hit like this, all the bones in their body would shatter due to the impact. The broken bones would pierce into the organs, and the organs would be crushed due to the pressure, causing a large amount of internal bleeding. To put it simply, it would be an instant kill. The elite rotten beast's 8.9-ounce strength was close to the peak of monsters below level 20. In Brando's memory, at this level, other than berserkers and dwarven iron sentinels, there were no other classes that could compare to it in terms of strength. However, he didn't plan to fight it head-on. He let Freya cover him from the side, and then used his advantage of agility to roll in and cut off the tree fork's left leg with the Thorn of Light. The giant bush monster was about 5 meters tall, and its claws were 3 meters long. Its attack range was very wide, but when it lowered its head, it found that it was difficult to attack Brando. Brando slashed with his sword, and the bright purification fire only left a burn mark on the monster's leg. The defense of the elite rotten beast made him break out in cold sweat. The elite rotten beast's constitution was high, and its toughness and resistance were not low, but it was definitely not this high. This meant that there was still a difference in strength between him and the monster. This was a setting in the amber sword, and he didn't expect it to exist here as well. However, the sword still hurt the rotten beast so much that it raised its head and let out a long howl. It was a buzzing sound, and the huge sound wave made the nearby weeds rustle. Brando felt a tightness in his chest, and Freya, who was not far away, coughed up blood. The effect of the roar of deterrence was not so obvious in the game. Was it because their levels were too low? Brando only felt that his internal organs were about to shift positions. The data on his retina showed that some of his organs had been damaged to varying degrees. Brando. Romaine's voice came from not far away. Brando turned around and found that she had already tied the rope and fixed the hook. He couldn't help but feel gratified. At critical moments, the Roman was still reliable. She was calm in the face of major events. She did have the potential to be a businesswoman. He looked in another direction. The rotten beast larvae were getting closer and closer. It was time to retreat. There were only a few seconds left. "Freya," he shouted immediately. "I'm fine, cough cough." The ponytailed girl stubbornly wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth, picked up her sword, and once again assumed a defensive posture. "This is the last attack. Cover me and get me out of its attack range." Freya nodded and held her sword with both hands. She followed the training rules and yelled as she attacked from the side. The giant shrubbery monster was about to step on Brando, but at this time, it had to pay attention to the other side. With its intelligence, it was difficult to understand which side was more difficult to deal with, but from an animal's instinct, Freya looked more imposing. So it immediately spread out the branches on its body and shot countless thorns at Freya. The future goddess of war had been on guard against this move since Brando reminded her. She immediately used her hands to protect her head, chest, and other important parts. Although the thorns still hit her and sent her flying back to the side, causing her to bleed, she gritted her teeth and felt gratified. At least she had bought some time for Brando. Brando did not have time to care about Freya's injuries. Once he was out of the shrubbery monster's attack range, he immediately squatted down and raised the shiny silver ring on his right hand to aim at the monster's injured left foot. Oasis. The air was stifled, and the explosive wind pressure hit the elite rotten beast's left leg with a bang. Wood splinters flew everywhere and a small part of its body exploded. The broken wood splinters and leaves were thrown far away like flowers scattered by a goddess. No matter how high the monster's defense was, it could not withstand a 20-ounce attack. After losing its left leg, it lost its balance and fell backward. Brando immediately used charge and jumped under the monster before it fell. He knew that it was not completely dead yet. The elite rotten beast had 42 HP. Although it was not as high as the gargoyle, it was not far behind. He raised the Thorn of Light, and with a light cracking sound, the sword in his hand pierced into the monster's neck. The elite rotten beast howled in pain and wanted to resist, but Brendel twisted his sword and a bright silver flame shot out from the blade. The rotten beast finally lowered its head weakly, and its life was slowly fading away. The flame of purification lost the suppression of the monster's HP and tenacity. It instantly surged and turned into a huge burning fireball. Then, countless golden lights flew out from the huge fireball and merged into Brando's body. 17 EXP. He suddenly felt a chill in his palm and subconsciously opened his palm. He found a black smoke coming out from the shrubbery monster and gathering in his palm. The smoke gradually solidified and formed a cold black crystal. A soul crystal. Brando did not expect this to appear here. He was shocked, but then he was pleasantly surprised. The power of the soul was the purest energy in the world. It was not only used by the necromancers of Madara, but also by the wizards of other schools. In the game, the soul crystal could be converted into EXP for the character through a ritual. Could also be used to activate some items and recharge some magic equipment. For example, the Ring of the Wind Empress. This soul crystal seemed to contain at least 30 EXP. It was enough to recharge the Ring of the Wind Empress once and still have some left. How could Brando not be happy? He originally thought that he would have to use the Ring of the Wind Empress in advance because of an unexpected situation. He could only find a safe place to hide for 3 hours before continuing on. Without the Ring of the Wind Empress, he did not dare to run around in this valley. But no matter what, 3 hours of time had been wasted. But he did not expect that there would be a turning point. He put away his sword and looked back. He found that the nearest rotten beast had already climbed up the platform. He could not help but be shocked. At this time he and Freya were both exhausted. They could not afford another fierce battle. It would be fine if it was just one of them, but it would be troublesome if they were entangled. On the other side, Freya, who was covered in wounds, was originally relieved when she saw Brando kill the giant bush monster. But when she saw the thorny monsters appear on the other side of the platform, she could not help but worry again. The young girl frowned and struggled to stand up. But she saw Brando striding over. He did not give her a chance to resist and carried her in his arms, running towards the Roman. Ah! Put me down. This future goddess of war was now just a girl from the countryside of Buchi. Her face was boiling hot. She struggled for a while, but Brando did not listen to her. She could only turn her red face to the side and quietly let him carry her. When they reached the bottom of the cliff, the Roman had already climbed up. This future merchant girl was not a timid girl. She was decisive, but Brando did not doubt that if he and Freya could not climb up, she would climb down alone. More and more rotten beasts were climbing up. He only had a few more seconds. He tied the rope around Freya's body, then wrapped it around his own waist. He felt the girl in his arms tensing up, but he did not care too much about it. Fortunately, the experience was enough for him to level up and raise, mercenary soldier, to level 3. His strength was 2.5 ounces, and it was enough for him to pull 2 people up with one hand. At that critical moment, a rotten beast jumped up and grabbed his leg. But Brando's reaction was faster. He stabbed his sword straight down and swept it back into the pile of monsters. The 3 of them climbed up the cliff and sighed in relief at the same time. Brando saw that the bush monsters below were grabbing the rope and trying to climb up. He did not hold back and cut the rope to let them fall back down. He still had a lot of rope anyway as long as the claws were preserved. Brando knew that the cliff was a few thousand meters long. If the golden demonic tree servants wanted to cause trouble for him, they would have to go around to another valley. He still had time, so he could not help but sit down and let out a long sigh. Good job. He could not help but give the Roman a thumbs up. The merchant girl's performance was too good. That Brando really picked up a treasure. Really? And he always says the same thing. Little Roman, you're the best. The merchant girl could not help but puff out her chest. She was a little proud, but her concerned gaze immediately fell on Freya. Brando knew that she was worried about her friend's injuries, so he replied, "Don't worry, it's just a superficial wound. Find a safe place to clean it up and bandage it and it will be fine." Freya's face was still red and she was too embarrassed to answer. But now that Brando had finally caught his breath, he looked at the future goddess of war and could not help but feel a little annoyed. He had originally wondered how this future Valkyrie had managed to survive such a tragic war. Was it because of her strength, calmness, and other precious qualities? The Freya of the past did give him such an impression. Although she was a little naive, she had a calmness that normal people did not have. Perhaps she had other reasons for coming here, but the fact that she refused to let go of the backpack made Brando unhappy. Freya was too stubborn. Perhaps it was because of her stubbornness that she had such a strong personality, but it was not a good thing on the battlefield. Why are you here? But since they were companions, Brando did not want to hurt her feelings. He thought for a moment and asked in a gentle tone. Freya was silent for a moment and took off a ring from her finger. "This is the guard captain's seal ring. Go to Fortress Reeden to report this. Uncle told me to bring this to you." Brando slapped his forehead. It was not that he had forgotten about this. In fact, he knew that the chances of him being valued in Fortress Reden was not high. Freya and the other militia did not know, but how could a veteran like Martin not know? If the nobles of Fortress Reden had valued the defense of Bucci, it would not have led to this situation. The main reason he went to Fortress Reden was because of his Roman aunt, but he did not expect Martin to be moved by his actions and actually send the seal ring over. This was also his negligence. If he had expected this, he would have directly rejected the offer. After all, this ring was very useful to the refugees. You asked to come, right? But Brando thought for a moment and felt that with the veteran's personality, he would not send Freya to her death even if the seal ring was very important. The girl tidied up her ponytail and nodded. Why? Brando, you are not from Bucci, what excuse do I have to escape? Chapter 39. Half-body armor of the Wind Empress? Brando opened the heavy backpack and took a look. When he saw the bronze armor neatly placed inside, he couldn't help but facepalm. No wonder the adult rotten beast could only restrain Freya. It was because of the protection of this thing. Why didn't you wear it? The armor is glowing. I was afraid that the undead of Madara would see it. I plan to wait for the day when the light is brighter. Light? It's the layer of cyan light that surrounds the armor, Li Mu said. That's the feather of the wind, not light? Brando saw Freya looking at him with a puzzled expression and couldn't help but sigh. This was the most basic knowledge in the game, but he didn't expect Freya to not know anything about it. He could only pick up the armor and explain it to her. The half-body armor of the Wind Empress was the work of Saint Orso. Just like his ring of the Wind Empress, it had the sacred Wind Empress pattern on it. However, there were different types of sacred Wind Empress pattern. For example, the ring of the Wind Empress was Delu's keepsake, and the sacred Wind Empress pattern on it was Saint Orso's national emblem. However, the one in Brando's hand was a fake, so it was also a very low-grade item. It might have been the work of a human wizard. Of course, although it was clumsy, a 20-ounce magic equipment wasn't something that Brando's grandfather should have. Regarding this mystery, his memory couldn't provide any help, so he could only put it aside for the time being. However, according to the game's logic, this might be a hidden mission line, but he could only find some clues when he met the cripple from Black Pepper Alley. On the other hand, the real Saint Orso's sacred Wind Empress pattern must have come from the hands of the elves. The half-body armor of the Wind Empress was the military equipment of the Elven Guards, so it was naturally pure. However, since the year of the return of the light, there were hundreds of sets that flowed into other countries every year, so it wasn't particularly precious. If it was Brando, it would only be a 15-ounce strength equipment in the game. The Feather of the Wind was the sacred Wind Empress pattern that was added to the half-body armor of the Wind Empress pattern. It was actually a spell, and its effect was to reduce the force that passed through it. In other words, it reduced damage. Just like the usual style of the elves, this spell was especially sensitive to plants, so it was normal for the rotten beast to be severely restricted. What Freya did not know was that the Feather of the Wind was a buff in the game, and its light could only be seen by the enemy when it was in effect. After listening to Brando's explanation, Freya looked embarrassed. It was too embarrassing. She was like a country girl who had never seen the world. She couldn't help but lower her head further and further. In the end, she grumbled in a low voice, "Why didn't you say so earlier?" Brando thought to himself, "How would I know, my young miss?" Of course, he subconsciously treated some things as common sense. He also thought that this might cause some misunderstandings, but after being immersed in the Amber Sword for so long, it was normal for him to find it difficult to adjust his identity as a player. When he saw Freya's flushed face and how she hugged the backpack tightly, he didn't even need to ask to know why she wouldn't throw the backpack away. So even the future goddess of war had her own feelings. He did not directly point it out, but it felt good to be trusted by someone. Brando's heart inevitably softened, and he naturally could not reprimand her. Things are dead, but people are alive. No matter how precious this thing is, you must ensure your own safety the next time you encounter such a situation, understand? He said. I'm sorry. Then what about the third team? I entrusted the team leader to Petit Finus. Petit Finus? Yes, Uncle Martin once told me that this child might be the most promising person in Bucci to walk out of this place. I used to take good care of him, hoping that one day he would be able to fight for our village. But I think you're right, how can a man grow up without training? You've thought it through, does Irene agree? Brando sighed. Freya finally walked out of her world. He previously thought that this girl was still holding on to her innocence and childishness, but after seeing her steady and bright eyes, he understood that she had grown up. Irene and I have the same thoughts. Brando nodded. After solving the internal problems of the team, he let out a sigh of relief. Fortunately, it was not a big problem. Although Freya was a little stubborn and shy, she was still a reliable companion in crucial moments. Especially when she did not throw away the backpack at the most critical moment. Although it made Brando angry, it also made him feel warm. At least this friendship was heavy. He could not help but turn around, and found that the Roman was looking at the shelter from the wind with sparkling eyes across the bonfire, as if she was looking at a rare treasure. It was as if the merchant girl would never be worried about her surroundings. Brando, how did you know about this place? If we're in this position, those terrifying monsters outside shouldn't be able to find us, right? She asked. Freya nodded, but we can't hide here forever. Let's wait for the sky to brighten a little before we leave. Brando also nodded. Both of them were right. There were a few such hidden terrains in the Zavale mountain path, and they were all on one side of the cliff. Back then, who knew how many nightingales and hunters had sacrificed their lives to find this small path, which allowed them to easily avoid most of the golden demonic tree servants in the valley and get close to the boss. But there were two difficulties. First, they had to go all the way from the cliff to the core of the Zavale mountain path where the golden demonic tree had taken root, which was also the so-called Forbidden Orchard. There were a few cuts that required the use of ropes. Moreover, the golden demonic tree was not stupid. There were several demonic tree patrols on the cliff, but Brando had his own ways to deal with them. The second difficulty was to secretly leave the secret passage behind the Forbidden Orchard, which required Griffin's crystal key. But that thing was hanging on the branch of the golden demonic tree. In the past, they had just killed the boss and left with it, but this time Brando had to find another way. He had already roughly thought of the steps, and the rest was just improvising. After all, not everyone could think of a perfect plan. Most of the plans they made in the game were just outlines, and those that only existed in novels did not exist in reality. At this time, the trump card in his hand was especially important. This was why Brando valued the Ring of the Wind Empress so much. Thinking of this, he could not help but take out the soul crystal and examine it under the light of the fire. The dark soul crystal looked like obsidian, but wizards could distinguish the two by injecting power. Even ordinary people could tell the difference if they were familiar enough. But Brando knew a simple way to test it. He put the crystal close to the fire and saw that the dark crystal showed signs of vaporization. He immediately recognized that it was a soul crystal. This was because the lack of protection of the soul's power was extremely unstable in front of an open fire. This also explained why the low-level undead in Madara were so afraid of fire. What is that? Romaine asked curiously. Brando put the crystal on the Ring of the Wind Empress. The crystal dimmed slightly and then became a little transparent. He thought for a moment and only injected 10 ounces of power. This was enough and it would be a waste to add more. But then he thought of his gargoyle statue, and the power contained in the soul crystal was the best medium to repair this amulet. But after hesitating for a moment, he gave up after putting the crystal on the ring. The gargoyle amulet had more than 300 possible control spells. He had spent half the night trying to guess half of them, and he did not have time to continue experimenting. Besides, the remaining 20 EXP was just a drop in the bucket and it would be a waste to use it. Brando thought for a moment, and it would take at least 100 EXP to completely repair this thing. What else could this thing be used for? Or was it waiting for other uses? But for the current Brando, only used EXP was useful EXP. His power was still too weak and he urgently needed to become stronger. Only by living on could he change. Should he use it for himself? Or use it as skill EXP? It was not enough for him to level up to the next level. Not to mention that the exchange of 10 EXP was too ugly, and he did not have any skills to train in under the current mercenaries. He could not continue to level up the militia, right? That would have to wait until he had enough EXP. Brando suddenly felt that he was in a dilemma, and he could not help but look at the sky outside. After dawn, the sky quickly became bright and they were about to leave. The golden demonic tree's magic servants were all blind, and they instinctively followed the light. They were also sensitive to sound and magic waves, so there was no difference between traveling during the day and at night. It was just that compared to humans, it was more convenient during the day. At least they did not have to use torches as they were too sensitive to rotten beasts. His hand continued to fumble in his pocket to see if there was anything else that could be of use, but he soon came across the card that looked like a card. Brando's heart skipped a beat and he subconsciously picked it up. He did not know what it was, but it did not stop him from experimenting. The best way to appraise an item was, of course, to have a complete set of information and alchemy tools. Players did not look for NPCs that professionally. But even in the game the appraisal fee was not cheap, and one of the features of the Amber Sword was that even if you did not know the attributes of the item, you could still use it as long as you knew how to use it. Therefore, many players figured out their own set of methods to appraise equipment, and Brando was no exception. He experimented with a few commonly used spells, but unfortunately, there was no reaction. He thought for a moment, and subconsciously touched the soul crystal to the piece of paper to see if there was any reaction. Generally speaking, magic items would resonate with the power of the soul, and if it was broken or could be recharged, it would even produce a higher level of reaction. But what Brando did not expect was that just as he touched the piece of paper suddenly produced a strong light, and the soul crystal in his hand faded in an instant, turning into a transparent crystal prism. Absorption reaction. Brando almost jumped up in shock. He looked at the transparent crystal prism in his hand and was speechless. A soul crystal that had lost its power of the soul was called a container. Wizards and elementalists would buy such containers at a high price to make storage items. It was similar to a scroll in this world. But that was not what Brando was concerned about. He only felt a bone-piercing chill rise up from his back. Absorption reaction was one of the few magic waves that were the strongest. This time he was in big trouble. He estimated that the golden demonic tree could feel the magic wave spreading from the air even if it was 10 miles away. Maybe it was not just the golden demonic tree. With such a strong reaction, who knew what strange things nearby would be targeting him? But what Brando did not understand was, how could such a low-level magic item have an absorption reaction? That was the privilege of magic items that were at least 40 ounces and above. No matter how surprised Roman and Freya looked at him, they certainly saw the dazzling black light. Brando made a prompt decision, stood up and said, "Let's go, let's get out of here. P.S. Thank you all for your support. Thank you, Brother Blade. Continue to ask for votes." Welcome to Chidian Chinese website. The newest, fastest, and most popular series are all at Chidian Originals. Chapter 40. Roman and Freya extinguished the bonfire and followed Brando out. They guessed that Brando's change might have something to do with the glaring black light from before, but they didn't even know how the black light was produced. Only the future Romaine had seen the soul crystal on Brando's hand, and she also knew that he had a very magical ring that could summon the wind to kill his enemies. That's right, he also gave her a ring. Roman especially liked the black and white spider silk patterns on the ring. In Bucci, or rather in the entire world of light, it was not common to use spider silk as decorations, but the rarer it was, the more she cherished it. She just didn't know if the ring had the same magical power. This was a side of Brando that she didn't know. The future Romaine was full of curiosity as she looked at the back of the young man standing in the valley in the early morning. She only felt that everything with Brando was full of mysteries and secrets. Brando, what happened? Compared to Roman's nonchalant attitude, Freya was more serious. This girl with a long ponytail thought that her responsibility was to share some of Brando's worries. Nothing big, but we should leave this place as soon as possible. Brando suppressed the uneasiness in his heart and said. He pulled out the elven sword and the barren rocks reflected a dim light. To be honest, he really didn't know how to explain the magic absorption reaction to Freya and Roman. In short, it was a spontaneous action of high-grade magic items to steal low-grade energy. But magic items below 40 ounces of strength would rarely have such a reaction. But no matter what, he couldn't explain these professional terms to Freya and Roman in such a short time. Freya looked at him worriedly but didn't ask any more questions. Brando looked down at the valley. There was no movement below, but he still felt insecure. He could only let Freya put on the armor and let Roman prepare the hook. Freya, on the other hand, was already wearing the half-plate of the Wind Empress, and she could just put it on. But she did not have any professional training, and her speed was not a factor. Roman was nervous and a little excited. She wanted to help, but she was afraid of being scolded by Freya. Although she and Freya were close friends, the ponytailed girl was merciless when she got angry. Moreover, she knew that she would only make things worse if she helped. Brando wasn't in a hurry, but he was more worried that the strong magic ripples would cause the monsters in the valley. That would be interesting. At the thought of this, he couldn't help but raise the card in his hand in shock. He didn't expect that the most important item in the Gironda wasn't the Thorn of Light, but this card. A magic item with 40 ounces of strength and above. What kind of concept was that? He remembered that he only saw it for the first time in the 5th year of the game. In the long Chaos era, human and elven sorcerers couldn't solve the problem of how to inject the second level of power into magic items. And this problem was solved by a genius in the Twilight of the Moon, Chaos 471. This genius was Tumen, the Elemental Emperor. Tumen's invention of the sacred rune engraving technology completely solved the problem of instilling the second level of power into magic items. It was only until then that it was possible to create magic items with 40 ounces of strength and above. Brando didn't doubt that the mysterious pattern on the back of the card was the sacred rune. It was just that he had never seen such a complicated sacred rune. It wasn't the Wind Empress rune of the elves, nor the Fire God rune of the Cruz people. As for the Sea King rune of the Atlanta, although he wasn't familiar with it, it definitely wasn't like this. He stared at the complicated pattern and couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. The skills passed down by Tumen had been revolutionary for nearly 1,000 years. Logically speaking, it was impossible for the sacred runes of the modern era to have such a complicated pattern. Unless this was an ancient artifact? But just as he was wondering, the card in his hand suddenly floated up without any warning and shot a black beam of light into the gray sky. Not long after, another beam of light shot up into the sky from the southeast mountains. Resonance. Brando didn't have time to react and could only watch the scene unfold in a daze. He was about to go crazy because the magic reaction this time was even bigger. He estimated that the Madara army that was more than 10 miles away should be alarmed. The only thing that could produce a resonance reaction was a part of the set. Brando didn't expect that the card in his hand was a set, and there was a resonance set in the Zavale mountain path. And what was worse was that they were in the resonance range. Brando? Brando, what's the matter? Roman and Freya spoke at the same time. This time, even if they were fools, they knew that there was something wrong with the card in Brando's hand. I'll explain it to you later. Have you put on your armor? Brando took one last look at the valley below and asked in an urgent tone. Freya nodded. The strong magic reaction had already caused the shadows of the magic servants to appear in the valley. Brando saw a few young rotten beasts passing through the dry valley below. He didn't dare to delay and immediately ordered Roman and Freya to throw away as much weight as possible and head east along the cliff. Dry food and water were important reserves, but they couldn't be used at this time. Brando only carried the basic equipment and a few rolls of rope. Each of them kept a torch and threw away the other necessary weights. They had to race against time. Along the way, more and more rotten beasts gathered at the bottom of the valley. It was as if the entire Zavale mountain path was boiling. Brando couldn't help but shudder when he saw the situation below. It really was a monster riot. However, he was on the cliff and the first batch of monsters would take at least 10 minutes to reach their previous campsite. Even if a few rotten beasts saw them from below, their numbers were nothing to worry about. Brando was really worried that the route of the demonic tree patrol on the eastern cliff would be changed because of this sudden change. Therefore, he had to reach the center of the valley before the golden demonic tree heirs arrived. Only there would he be able to kill the first patrol team. He knew that the patrol team should have just passed by the river. Even if they turned back immediately, it would take them 2 hours to reach the center of the valley. In order to farm the heart of the golden demonic tree, he had come to this dungeon countless times. Every movement was imprinted in his memory. The only thing he was worried about was the difference between reality and the game. Fortunately, they arrived there just a little bit earlier than the rest of the group. The three of them saw a group of monsters covered in vines rushing from the east. Both sides had discovered each other at almost the same time. The demonic trees were about half the height of a human when they stood up. Their bodies were wrapped in root-like vines. They didn't have eyes, but the membrane-like organs on their limbs allowed them to capture all the details of sound. They were also divided into two types, adult and juvenile. Adult demonic trees were very agile and could run through the valley like it was flat ground. They were also good at climbing and were the biggest threat in Brando's heart. However, there was only one adult demonic tree in this group of 10 which matched his memory. Let's hurry to the top of the mountain before they do. Brando saw the demonic trees getting closer and closer and his hands were sweating. There was a huge rock at the top of the mountain. In the game they could use explosives to loosen it and roll it down to kill the patrolling demonic trees and block the valley. Of course, Brando didn't have any explosives in his hands right now, and he couldn't find any at the moment. However, he had the Ring of the Wind Empress, which was much more powerful than explosives. He looked at the small platform at the top of the mountain and couldn't help but sigh. If it was in the past, he could easily rush there before the adult demonic trees. However, because of the paralysis poison, his dexterity had dropped by 0.3 energy rank. He could only rely on Freya and Roman. Although the two girls didn't understand what Brando was thinking, they still nodded their heads hard. At this critical moment, although Brando didn't say anything, they knew that the monsters in front of them weren't to be trifled with. Both sides were in a hurry. Freya and Brando were slightly better, but Roman, whose body was slightly weaker, had a pale face and was almost out of breath. Fortunately, because of the time advantage, they reached the top of the mountain first. However, they were only one step ahead. Brando and Freya had just climbed up when the adult demonic trees appeared. It was a level 22 monster. Brando didn't need to think to know that the chances of winning were 0. However, even if the chances of winning were negative, they still had to go. They couldn't just sit there and wait for death, right? Brando immediately threw the Ring of the Wind Empress to Freya and shouted, "Attack the joint between the rocks and knock it down. The password is OSS. Do you understand?" Freya subconsciously caught the ring and was startled. "Brando? Bring it to the index finger. I'll stall this monster. Hurry up." Brando originally wanted to let Roman do it. At least he could save someone to protect himself. However, when he turned around, he saw that Romain was still far behind. This was the consequence of being lazy. He couldn't help but shake his head. Turning around, Brando took a deep breath. He was so nervous that his body stiffened. Although he appeared calm in front of Freya, it didn't mean that he wasn't afraid. The demonic trees weren't rotten beasts. They had solid level 1 strength. After losing the Ring of the Wind Empress, he found it hard to believe that he could fight against them. 5 energy rank strength, 6 energy rank vitality, 2 energy rank dexterity. High defense and toughness. Skin has corrosive poison. Good at long-range attacks. Has binding ability. Weak fire. Weak slashing. Brando calmed down and remembered the attributes of his opponent. Just from the data, this adult demonic tree wasn't too different from an elite rotten beast. However, he knew that the difference between the two of them was like heaven and earth. Just as Brando thought of this, the vines on the demonic tree's body seemed to have come alive. Countless vines flew towards him. He was so scared that he hurriedly rolled to the side to dodge. The vines that looked soft before were now like steel cables piercing into the rock. The surface of the rock immediately emitted a sizzling sound and started to emit white smoke. Corrosive. This was the scariest thing about the demonic trees. Normal swords wouldn't be able to hurt them at all. Instead, they would be damaged by their corrosive skin. The demonic tree heard the sound and knew that it missed. It immediately swung its vines to the side and the vine whips swept towards Brando. The latter cursed in his heart, but he could only continue to roll to dodge. The steel cable swept across the ground, causing rocks to fly everywhere. The flying rocks hit Brando's eyebrows, causing blood to flow from his forehead. However, he didn't dare to cry out in pain. He grabbed the Thorn of Light and pounced towards the demonic tree while it was attacking. However, at this moment he was stunned. He saw a row of green words appear on his retina. "Do you want to summon Holy Sword? P.S. Everyone, please don't urge me to update. Especially those that cost 12,000. That's a complete waste of money. I support everyone's tipping. At @_it, please recommend me to your collection." Chapter 41. Summon the Holy Sword? There were many treasured swords in Vaunt that were given the title of Holy Sword, such as the Wind Crown, Nordis, the Sword of the Endless Sky, the Holy Sword of the Mountains, Extremis, and the only holy sword that was obtained by a player back then, Amber. However, Brando thought that these legendary names had nothing to do with him. Was this a spell? He knew that the priest had a low-level light spell called Holy Sword, but that spell had a string of pure offensive spells that had nothing to do with summoning or summoning. In the game, magic words were very serious and couldn't be changed or matched. However, regardless of what this Holy Sword summon was, according to Brando's knowledge, any spells used by the players in the game didn't have any negative effects. The most serious consequence was that the player's mental strength would be overdrawn, but it wouldn't cause a splitting headache. At most, the player would feel a little tired. Thus, when he thought of this, he calmed down and gave the order to summon the Holy Sword. After all, anyone would do a business that wouldn't lose money. Moreover, he didn't have the hope that this was a last resort. Brando slowed down a little, and the demonic tree had already controlled 2 snake vines to attack him. However, he immediately lowered his body and waved his sword upwards. With a silver arc, the 2 rotten snake vines flew into the air and turned into ashes. Then our protagonist's attack didn't slow down. With one hand on the ground, his whole body accelerated and entered the demonic tree's range. However, when he was about to take the next step, the screen projected on his retina changed. Warrior's Path unlocked. Heroic Card Deck, Chapter 2, Knight, Holy Sword. As this is the first time the character has activated the Destiny card deck, the guide system is loading. Lines of ghostly words appeared and quickly disappeared. Holy Sword, the symbol of knight's devotion and sword of purity. Effect: pay 6 Earth EP from the elemental pool to summon the Holy Sword. Summoning conditions have been met. Please display the card, place your thumb on the center of the sacred rune of destiny, and use your index finger and thumb to form a magic triangle to ignite the holy sword. Brando immediately found himself unable to attack due to the interference of these messy things. His hands paused for a moment, and he was forced back by the demonic tree's vines. He cursed in his heart, but he knew that even if he wasn't disturbed, his chances of success weren't high. Brando could not help but gasp for breath. He turned back to look at Freya. The girl was struggling all the way to the bottom of the giant rock. She was not far away, but her light brown ponytail was bobbing up and down behind her back. His attention then turned to another direction. The other demon tree younglings below were still a step behind. It seemed like the future Valkyrie would be fine. However, things were not looking good for the Roman either. She could no longer crawl and was gasping for air. On the other hand, Brando had already exchanged a blow with the demonic tree. Both sides didn't gain much of an advantage, but the golden demonic tree's descendant discovered that the human in front of it wasn't as powerful as it imagined. It was only afraid of the elven treasure sword in his hand. Brando was well aware of this. He once again clenched his sword, but at this time a prompt flashed in his vision. Display card? Brando was stunned, but he was an experienced player after all, so he immediately thought of the card in his bosom. As if he had an epiphany, he immediately took out the card. So this sacred rune was called the Sacred Rune of Fate, but why hadn't he heard of it before? Brando couldn't help but have some doubts in his heart, but he had already put his thumb on it. Heroic Card Deck, Chapter 2 Knight, Sacred Sword, successfully locked on. A dazzling black light shot out. The penetrating magic wave was like a sharp sword piercing into the brain of every creature nearby. Not only did the adult demonic tree couldn't help but howl, but even Freya and Roman stopped under the influence of the heart throbbing. One of them turned back and the other raised their head to look at Brando. They saw the card in Brando's hand disappear after a wave of black waves. Brando, the card in your hand disappeared. Romaine anxiously shouted. Her eyes were really good, from where she stood to where Brando was at least 50 meters away. But Brendel turned a deaf ear to the future merchant girl's words, because he could only stare blankly at the new information that appeared on his retina. Sacred sword, the symbol of the knight's devotion and sword of purity. When it is on the field, pay 1 Earth EP to attack the enemy, or pay 1 Earth EP to dispel diseases, curses and dark effects. For every 10 minutes the sacred sword is on the field, the character needs to pay 2 Earth EP and 2 Spirit to maintain it. The sacred sword's range of effect is 1,000 meters. What kind of evil witchcraft is this? Brando had never heard of a magic item that required the player to continuously pay energy to use it. Spirit didn't need to be explained, it was only related to one's willpower. But he knew about this elemental pool. In his impression, only elementalists, spellblades and Sun Knight classes had elemental pools, because they needed to draw on elemental energy to cast spells. But there had never been a magic item that required the player's elemental pool. Didn't that mean that the player couldn't use it without an elemental pool? And the most important thing was that it required continuous consumption. This meant that if he wanted to use the soul crystals to charge the card, he would have to ensure that he had enough soul crystals in his hands. But having enough soul crystals was easier said than done. It wasn't like every monster had to drop them. Of course, although he had doubts in his mind, there was no need to doubt the power of this magic item. As expected of an item with 40 ounces of strength and above, its effects were definitely not discounted at all. Brando swung his hand from top to bottom. A sharp sword made of light suddenly appeared behind him. The sword was as tall as 2 people and as wide as 1 person. The guard was a golden cross. And a pair of wings spread out from both sides of the sword guard. From afar, it looked as if Brando had a pair of snow-white wings on his back. Romaine was stunned for a moment, taking in the scene from below. Her eyes were immediately filled with worship and excitement. Brando was so handsome. Freya was also stunned, but at least she remembered her mission. Gritting her teeth, she grabbed onto the rock and continued to climb up. The wound on her hand from last night seemed to have broken again, and the stinging pain made her frown. And Brando felt his own status. The holy sword cleared away the 2 negative statuses on him as soon as it appeared. The rotting poison and paralyzing poison disappeared instantly like snow melting away, and he could feel the power of the holy light overflowing in his body as he raised his hand. 40 ounces, level 2 strength, this was at least the standard of a cleric. In other words, after entering the state of the holy sword, Brando was no different from an official cleric in terms of dispelling. If one didn't look at his clothes and resume at that moment, anyone would think that Brando was a cleric just by sensing his aura. It was really strange that a card summoned from the earth elemental could actually simulate the power of the light elemental so realistically. He couldn't help but wonder who made this card. But what Brando didn't know was that under his suddenly strengthened aura, the demonic tree in front of him was already a little restless. An adult golden demonic tree's offspring was only level 22, and 40 ounces of power was close to level 30. Under the threat of such a strong aura, it was difficult for a creature that wasn't very smart to control the panic in its heart. It screamed and finally couldn't help but launch an attack. The vine-wrapped monster's body suddenly expanded, and all the vines on it flew towards Brando to stab him. "Brando, be careful," Romaine warned from below. Brando furrowed his brows. Because he didn't have an elemental pool, he didn't know how much earth elemental he could withdraw. But generally speaking, the conversion of soul crystals to elemental pool was 1-to-1, so according to the remaining energy, there should be 20 earth elemental points in this card. Summoning the Holy Sword used 6 earth elemental points, so there should be 14 earth elemental points left. This calculation was still considered generous, so he swiped his right hand forward and paid 1 earth elemental point to use the Holy Sword's attack skill. It was like a golden blade shooting out from between his 5 fingers. Wherever the light passed, the vines were burned into ashes. This was the Holy Sword technique. Brando immediately recognized it. This was a low-level priest's attack spell, but after the power level was increased, its attack power was just as terrifying. The demonic tree howled and retreated. Brando's attack almost swept away 1/3 of its vines. The demonic tree relied on the golden demonic tree to provide magic sustenance, and it was these vines that needed many years to slowly grow back. But our hero did not give it a chance. He attacked from left and right, consecutively piercing the adult demonic tree's body with 3 golden swords, and then chopped down with his hand. With a loud bang, the golden demonic tree's offspring exploded from the center of its body, turning into ashes. At the same time, Freya also activated the Ring of the Wind Empress. Her attack was slightly off target, but with the power of the wind bullet she was able to send the huge rock flying. Accompanied by a loud rumbling sound, the huge rock the size of a small mountain rolled down. Wherever it passed, whether it was the sharp rocks or the demonic trees, they were all turned into dust. In an instant, more than 10 demonic trees died at the same time. Even the golden demonic tree could not bear such a loss. It let out a terrifying howl, and the sound almost penetrated the entire Zavale Valley. But Brando had heard this howl 800 times in the game, if not 1,000 times, so he was already used to it. Hearing it now made him feel nostalgic. On the other hand, Freya and Roman were shocked and looked at each other. What is that, Brando?" the ponytailed girl asked from the top of the mountain. "Don't worry, we won't interact with it." Finally, the battle was over and Brando was relieved. After this patrol team was dealt with, the rest was much easier. He estimated the time, and the Holy Sword could be maintained for another hour and a half. This amount of time was not enough for them to walk out of the valley. And if he dispelled the Holy Sword now, he might be able to summon it again. Thinking of this, he decisively kept the card. At this time, Romaine was gasping for breath as she climbed up from below. She asked, "Brendel, just now what was that?" "It was the power of that card. I didn't expect it to be a magical item." He saw a bunch of stars in Roman's eyes and answered ambiguously, "Magical item?" Freya heard this answer and was secretly shocked. The ring that Brando gave her was also a magical item, and so was the half-plate of the Wind Empress. But how could a normal person know so much about magic? In her eyes, magic was mysterious, as if it was a legend that only existed in stories. She could not help but take a closer look at the young man below, as if she wanted to see through his true identity. He said that he was Braggs's militia, but now Freya felt more and more that this was definitely perfunctory. But what she did not expect was that at this moment, in a world that she could not see, an even more spectacular scene was happening. Because Brando raised his head, and saw a mountain of golden light flying towards him. Killing monsters that were above his level was really a good thing. Chapter 42. 420 EXP. The golden light converged into a small stream in the air and flowed into Brendel's body. Looking at the messy battlefield, he couldn't help but lean against a rock and sit down. That was a level 22 monster. Even if he was a civilian, he was only level 6. Even in the game, he wouldn't dare to be so careless to kill a monster that was 14 levels higher than him. But due to the pressure of survival, he had no choice but to do so. His original plan was to lure the adult rotten beast under the rock and wait for Freya to attack before finding an opportunity to escape. This opportunity was too difficult to grasp. If it was in the game, not many people would dare to do so. After all, it was still a level of EXP. When he made the decision, he didn't feel anything, but now that he thought about it, he felt a burst of fear and his back was cold. His last bit of confidence supported him to answer Freya and Roman calmly on the surface so that they wouldn't be too worried. But in fact, only Brando himself knew the situation he was in. He felt that this was simply overdrafting his courage. But unknowingly, people also grew up in this kind of extreme environment. Not only him, but Freya was also the same. If it was a few days ago she was just a civilian, but now she had made her own decision. He slowly calmed himself down. The battle in the canyon was a rare harvest for him. 420 EXP was too important for him at the moment. It was equivalent to sending charcoal in the snow. The most important thing was to increase his strength. Mercenaries needed 70 EXP to reach level 4, 130 EXP at level 5, 220 EXP at level 6, and according to the settings, a second profession skill would be unlocked after level 5. Mercenary level 4 0, 3 strength 0, 2 vitality 0, 2 dexterity 0, 1 wisdom. Mercenary level 5 0, 3 strength 0, 3 vitality 0, 2 dexterity 0, 1 will. Mercenary level 6 0, 4 strength 0, 3 vitality 0, 2 dexterity 0, 2 wisdom. When he leveled up, rows of data that indicated the changes in his attributes were projected onto his retina. When he was a level 3 mercenary, his attributes were strength 2, 5, dexterity 2, 3 and vitality 2, 4. When he reached level 6, his attributes were strength 3, 5, dexterity 2, 9 and vitality 3, 2. This meant that his vitality was 3 times that of a normal person, and his strength was more than 25 times. Relying purely on strength and ignoring his experience, Brando could easily defeat the entire Bucci militia. With the bonus of experience points, even if it was the same number of guards, they wouldn't have an easy time against him. This was the power of level 1. Even the vice-captain of Bucci's garrison, Breton, could only barely reach the strength of a rank 1 on a warhorse. Even so, the veteran Martin still thought that he was a genius. After all, Breton was only 20 years old. With his youth and talent, he might one day become a Lily Knight. In a sense, he could be considered a pillar of the kingdom. At this moment, Brando was 1 year younger than him. If the original Brando was here, he would not believe that he could reach this step in just 3 days. Out of 10 people, half of them would never be able to break through to level 1 from the strength of an ordinary person. As for those who completed it before the age of 20, only 10 to 20% of them completed it. However, Brando knew that this was not enough. Among the newborns that were baptized by the Holy Cathedral of Fire every year, he knew that many of them were born with level 1 strength. They were the so-called natural aristocrats, the revelators. Moreover, there were also rare people who were born with level 2 strength. They were the so-called chosen ones. As for those who had the talent of a knight, players were also included in this category. There were even more of them. This was a world that worshipped strength. Brando understood that if he wanted to stand out, he had to use his advantage as well. What was his advantage? It was the strength that was given to him by another world. After level 5, a mercenary skill would be Strength Burst. In the next action, they would consume 3 times their stamina and gain 1 OZ level of strength. This was the most important skill for a mercenary in the early stages. Brando would not be stingy with it. Now that he had 150 experience points, even if he trained this skill to level 6, he would only need to use a third of it, 55 experience points. After level 6, this skill would instantly increase one's strength by 4 ounce levels, almost reaching the mid-stage of level 1 strength. The remaining skill points would naturally be used to improve his military swordsmanship and combat skills. He also used the remaining 6 experience points on the militia, allowing it to advance to level 3. This way his strength and vitality would both increase by 0.2 ounce levels. This was the reason why so many people in the game chose to take up a profession despite the experience points penalty. It was because the experience points gained from taking up a profession in the early stages was much higher than taking up a profession. Of course, Brando thought so too. However, there was a limit to everything. Those who took up a profession in the past did pay a price. After all, after entering level 3 strength and elemental activation, the profession's adjustments were not as obvious. His total level was 10. Brando couldn't help but close his eyes and let out a long sigh. Now, the rotten beast was just giving him experience points. If he wasn't in a hurry to send the letter to Fortress Reedon, he would have wanted to farm some experience points on the outskirts of Zavale Mountain Road. At most, he would have reached level 15 in half a month. Unfortunately, time did not allow him to do so. He squinted his eyes again. The shadows of rotten beasts began to appear in the distant valley. The bush monsters were looking at him from across the valley. Of course, they didn't have vision, but the commotion from before must have alerted them. Brando quietly picked up his sword. He wasn't afraid of these things. However, it wouldn't be good to be entangled with them. The Roman ant was still in the city. They and the Madara army were racing against time to reach Fortress Reden. At this moment he suddenly remembered the seal ring that Martin gave him. He couldn't help but take out the seal ring with the pine leaf emblem from his pocket. The young man thought of something and couldn't help but sneer. The veteran of the November War also didn't understand this point. Wuxia was the most important buffer zone in the direction of Fort Reden's defensive line. Since the Year of Thunder, the central government of the kingdom had been preparing to build a complete defensive line here. However, the implementation of government orders wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface. Due to the lack of funds, the construction of Fort Reden was already the limit of this project. As for the warning system in the buffer zone, the nobles didn't even think about it. As long as Fort Reden were still in their hands, they could still live a good life. As for the countryside outside, Madara didn't invade every year, right? Even though there were Freya, Breton, and Martin who fought for the kingdom, Erwin was already old, and that was another fact. The rotten upper echelons were destroying the foundation of the kingdom. Wuxia was an exception, and Brando knew that there were traces of the kingdom's demise everywhere else. He couldn't help but sigh and look to the east. The sky in the east was covered by layers of dark clouds, and even the morning sun had dimmed. There was a kingdom rising in the darkness. Brando, your ring. Brando turned around and saw Freya looking at him with sparkling eyes. He couldn't help but joke, "Do I look good?" "You?" The ponytail girl's face turned red. She turned around and saw the Roman sitting on the slope looking over with a smile. "Roman, you idiot. What did I do?" The merchant girl was stunned. Brando smiled. He obviously knew that Freya was just venting her anger on him. He put on the ring of the Wind Empress and touched the card of fate in his chest. Even though he had never seen this thing before, he knew that it was his biggest trump card. Even if it was only for 10 minutes, it was enough for him to do a lot of things. For example, killing the golden demonic tree. With the card of fate he made a new plan. After all, the loot from the golden demonic tree was too tempting. Wealth came from danger, and the more power he had here, the more chances he would have in Fort Reden. Furthermore, killing the golden demonic tree wasn't like killing monsters. It didn't require much time. He estimated that he had around 8 hours left, which was more than enough. But before that, if he could get another soul crystal, he would have a 90% chance of success. After all, using the holy sword required an earth EP. He even considered whether or not he should open his own elemental pool. But it wasn't worth it to be an elementalist or a spellblade for a 40-ounce magic item pool. This was because it was best for the classes to be related to each other so that they could complement each other. The elementalist, spellblade, and sun knight all had their own system, and it was difficult for them to provide any help to the warrior class. In Brando's mind, he had always treated the mercenaries as warriors. After all, these two classes looked similar in the early stages and even their skills were the same. The only thing left was the elemental soul quest that opened the elemental pool for normal people. He didn't know if there were any similar quests in this world. Of course, those were things that happened a long time ago. He didn't have time to think too much about it. There was still a long way to go from here to the Forbidden Orchard, but he could still save 2 hours if he went straight. Using 2 hours to clear out the monsters and see if he could find another elite rotten beast was Brando's goal. Thinking of this, he stood up and patted Freya's shoulder. Then he said to the two ladies, "Okay, rest is over. Let's get ready to go." Unfortunately, his action of comforting Freya out of goodwill ended up touching a part of her body that he shouldn't have touched. It felt good to the touch and he could feel the softness and elasticity even through the layer of metal scales. The atmosphere instantly froze. Brando looked at our future goddess of war's face that was initially red hot, then white and then black. He wanted to explain, but what awaited him was the hilt of the holy sword slashing at him. Shameless bastard. Wait, I didn't mean to, P.S. Today's collection growth has stagnated again. Please vote and collect, carrot. Chapter 43. After the fog in the forest dissipated, the battle was more or less over. The ambush launched by the young guards did bring about some unexpected results to Madara's vanguard, but when Cabias gathered more powerful undead, the outcome of the battle quickly became clear. The forest quieted down. Lord Cabius. The pale necromancer apprentice placed his hand on his chest and respectfully bowed to the tall skeleton in front of him. I thought you maggots wouldn't come to see me, Rothko? The eyes of the skeleton general in brass armor were burning fiercely. It sat on a pile of corpses with its legs spread apart. It held its double-edged axe in one hand and pressed its other hand on its knee. It looked down at the skinny apprentice with disdain. The Dark Lords and Necromancers had always hated each other. This time they were united under the command of the Mercury Staff, but they were divided at heart. As for the Blood Descendants, they had always maintained their own circle and rarely participated in Madara's affairs. This kingdom had been divided for centuries, and it was only recently that a smoke-like darkness broke out from the cocoon under the stable shell. This was the prophecy of the Banshees, and it also coincided with goddess Helene's prophecy about the spreading darkness of the East. Whether it was the Dark Lords, Necromancers, or Blood Descendants, everyone believed that this era was coming to an end, and Madara was about to usher in a new era. Rothko smiled. Cabius was one of Tarkus's main generals, while he was just a small squadron leader. The difference between them was huge. The only reason this skeleton was reprimanding him was because his vanguard had stolen the limelight of the entire army. Relying on 300 skeletons and 20 necromancers to defeat Butchie's guards, and then annihilate the Green Village's self-defense regiment, allowing Cabius to march straight in. Finally, they cooperated with Cabius to annihilate Butchie's guards. Such a result could only be described as glorious. According to Madara's traditions, the vanguard of an army was usually used as cannon fodder to deplete the enemy's strength. At the worst, they were used as a buffer to delay time. This vanguard was made up of skeleton soldiers and low-level liches. Erwin's side only needed a third of this size to defeat them easily. In Tarkus's plan, Rothko was merely a chess piece used to disrupt his plans. The true vanguard was Cabius and Ghoul, Weezer. However, the one-eyed vampire commander did not expect that this apprentice necromancer named Rothko would give him such a huge surprise. It was just like how he didn't expect Ghoul Weezer to make such a huge mistake on the right flank. The battlefield was always full of variables, and even an excellent commander could not take the lead at every step, not to mention that Tarkus was famous for his steadiness. However, this lowly apprentice necromancer still didn't know what his future path was. Naturally, he wouldn't retort. On the contrary, Cabius' words were more like an honor to him. After all, Cabius was targeting all necromancers, and it was indirectly raising his status. He glanced at the row of warriors of darkness behind Cabius and felt a little envious. He had looted a lot of good stuff during the invasion, but most of it had to be handed over. What was left was not enough to summon a single warrior of darkness. He heard that there was a tomb of a Templar knight in the Green Village. That was the best vessel, but it was now Cabius's territory. It was a pity, but forget it. There would be plenty of opportunities in the future. This time, Madara came to reap some benefits, and all the generals saw this as an opportunity. He thought for a moment and replied, Lord Cabius, a few rats escaped the net and fled to the north. We also didn't see the refugees yesterday afternoon. I suspect that they are creating a diversion, and their main force has already entered the River of Daggers. That was enough for him. The north was controlled by Ghoul Weezer. If he wanted to chase those living materials back or at least get a share of the loot, he would need the approval of this god of death. He was just a small captain and he couldn't bear this responsibility. But Cabius was no fool. It glanced at the little undead sorcerer's apprentice and suddenly realized that this guy's motives were not pure. It couldn't help but adjust its jaw and make a cracking sound. You want me to go and fight with that baldy Weezer? What benefits can I get from that? Small maggots. You can further expand your strength. Isn't that enough, my lord? Humph, they're just a bunch of mobs. I have no interest in those weak skeletons. I heard that there is a veteran of the November War in Butchie's garrison. He is the captain of those humans. Cabius's eyes flashed. The gains do not make up for the losses. That brat Weezer has it easy. Rothko sighed, knowing that he had failed to persuade Cabius. He raised his head and was about to leave. After all, he and Cabius weren't people of the same system. If not for this matter, he wouldn't have come. Although Cabius was the commander of the army, he was a member of the undead wizards. His vanguard didn't have to listen to his orders. But at this moment, his heart trembled slightly, and he couldn't help but look towards the south. The tall skeletons also looked in that direction. Their line of sight passed through the forest and landed in the shadows of the mountains. What a strong magic reaction. It's the Zavale mountain path. Cabius sniffed the air as if it could smell the magic coming from the direction of the Song River. Rothko didn't answer, because he immediately felt an even stronger magic wave coming from that direction. What was that golden demonic tree up to? Such a strong reaction could be felt by any wizard tens of miles away. He suddenly felt a little worried. He didn't know if the White Mane warlocks in the direction of Fortress Reden would notice anything. It's best if we send some people out first, Lord Cabius. If you don't have to tell me. Us undead creatures are much more sensitive to magic than you. Wait until you become a lich, then you can teach me a lesson. Rothko laughed. Brando brought Freya and Roman out from a crack in the cliff. He immediately gestured for them to stop. From here they could see the entire valley outside. In the middle of the barren mountains, there were gray rocks that were sunken downwards, and sharp stalagmites protruded out of the ground. A huge golden oak tree was quietly rooted in the middle of the valley. This was the Forbidden Orchard. The golden demonic tree had absorbed the nutrients and magic elements from the earth, causing the earth to wither. The earth elements that had lost their adhesion to the ground rose into the air, resulting in such a scene. Brando raised his head. The sky above the valley was gloomy, as if dark clouds were pressing down on them. This was also caused by the imbalance of the elements. Because of the disintegration of the earth elements, it attracted a large amount of other elements to gather here, causing the elemental order to be abnormally chaotic. The elemental order was a rule set by Marcia when she created the world. It was controlled by the 4 elven kings, but the order wasn't necessarily stable and unchanging. Just like what the golden demonic tree did, human factors often disturb the environment. In the past, because of the abnormality of the elements in this valley, the power of the elementalists was suppressed by 30%. Because of this reason, almost no team in this dungeon would accept the elementalists. This period of history was called the 3 Years of Blood and Tears by the elementalists. Of course, later on, this class suddenly became a force to be reckoned with. Roman and Freya stared at the demonic golden demonic tree in a daze. They had only heard of such a creature in bedtime stories. They did not expect to see it with their own eyes one day. For a moment they even suspected that they were dreaming. Moreover, the beauty of the golden demonic tree and the surrounding desolation presented a strong visual conflict. It was as if they were looking at a realistic fantasy, full of fantasy. What is that? Freya could not help but ask in a daze. It's so beautiful, Brando. Is that the golden apple tree in the fairy tales? Those monsters are the guards of this tree, right? I didn't expect such a beautiful creature to exist in such an environment. That is an oak tree, Roman. The future Valkyrie sighed. Of course I know it. It's just a golden oak tree. Romaine raised her eyebrows and hurriedly explained. Don't be fooled by its beauty. This should be the most dangerous creature you have ever seen. No, it should be a monster. Brando's eyes carefully scanned the entire valley. He quickly found a patrol of demonic trees. Those monsters were covered in vines and were slowly moving along the rugged rocky surface. This matched his memory from the game. Monsters? Yes, the monsters we encountered before were all born because of it. How? Freya could not help but widen her eyes in shock. In fact, she and Roman had also seen this patrol of demonic trees. However, they were not too nervous when facing these monsters. Along the way, the 3 of them had already dealt with these golden demonic trees too many times. Brando earned 65 EXP and even obtained a tree crystal from an adult demonic tree. This thing was a crafting material in the game. He did not know how the crafting skills in this world were calculated. In short, he carried it with him as a precaution. However, he noticed that Freya and Roman had also grown significantly during the battle. Especially the future Valkyrie, her strength and agility had increased very quickly. After a few battles, she was almost at the level of a guard student. However, Brando still did not know how they gained EXP. On the surface, it seemed that they were much slower than him. This was because for high-level monsters like the demonic trees, by right, killing a few of Freya's militia should have leveled up a few times. However, in reality he felt that it was not as fast as his second profession as a mercenary. This made him a little puzzled. Of course, at this moment he had to put aside all his doubts because they had more important things to do. If they waited for the golden demonic tree to discover them and call back the rotten beasts outside, they would not have much time left. Brando had calculated in the game before. From the start of the battle to the arrival of the first batch of rotten beasts, there was a maximum of 15 minutes, which was the duration of the Holy Sword's existence. If they could not kill the golden demonic tree before then, they would have to consider escaping. However, Brando did not consider immediately going up to fight. First of all, not to mention how to deal with the patrol of demonic trees, he had another question to answer. Thinking of this, he could not help but look at a higher cliff on the other side. You guys wait for me here. Do not be discovered. He turned around and said, Brando? P.S. Go 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 go. Chapter 44. Brando glanced at the steep cliffs in the distance and turned back to let Roman put on the ring of cobwebs. He found that the merchant girl's senses were surprisingly sensitive, and this ring could further strengthen her ability. Roman had been coveting this beautiful black and white patterned ring for a long time and was naturally very happy, but he still asked curiously, Is this also a magic ring, Brando? Yes, it can let you hear better. Keep an eye on the ground and alert Freya if there's any movement. I'll be back soon. Brando knew that other than the golden demonic tree, there was also a stone worm in this valley. That thing also came from the elemental plane and was a rare elite in the game. There was once when it suddenly appeared and almost made him panic. Are there other enemies? The two girls asked together. Maybe. It's better to be prepared, right? Brando did not want to pretend to be a prophet, and the key was that it would be difficult to explain in the future, so he could only give a vague answer. Freya nodded understandingly and held the sheathed long sword in front of Roman and said, I'll protect Roman well, please be sure to go and come back quickly. Brando looked at her in surprise. Since when did this girl become so cooperative? She actually made him feel a little overwhelmed. However, it didn't seem like there was any conspiracy. He hesitated for a moment, put down his backpack and took out a coil of rope and a hook. He glanced at the two girls again and then carefully climbed out. Freya, is it okay for Brando to go out alone? Roman asked softly. Brando has his own plans and we can't help much. We can only make sure he doesn't have to worry about this side. Freya? Freya swung her long ponytail, a serious look in her bright eyes. She was not admitting defeat, but she could only do so much with her strength. The future goddess of war seriously considered that her strength might not be enough. To become the leader, she must be stricter with herself. She sighed and held her sword close to her chest, making up her mind. On the other side, Brando carried the rope and walked along the steep mountain wall. He was still a few dozen meters away from the crack in the wall. He could not help but take a deep breath and look behind him. Fortunately, the golden demonic tree and its servants and children relied on sound and magic waves instead of sight to find their target, or else his position would be very conspicuous. He grabbed a protruding rock and the gravel rustled in between the rocks, but the noise was nothing. He was worried that he would make a big noise, so he tried his best to be as light as possible. There were less than 30 meters left. There were no more soul crystals along the way, but Brendel knew that he still had one last chance. There was a treasure in the crack in front of them. No, it wasn't quite right to call it a treasure. Although the players called all the hidden places that provided items and resources as rewards treasures, he knew that the treasures there were actually some relics. According to the game's plot, about 10 years ago, a young noble called Borg Nesson who loved adventure came to this canyon. He and his companions were separated from each other during the attack of the demonic tree. He was lucky enough to escape and hide here, but in the end he could not escape from his injuries and died. He left behind his belongings and keepsakes. With the keepsakes he could complete a mission in Brax. Although the reward was meager, it was better than nothing for Brando at that time. However, the belongings that the noble left behind were very interesting. Because it was random, anything could be opened if one was lucky. Brando's best luck was opening an amber Oregon. Of course he did not count on it this time. As long as he could get a soul crystal, it would be good enough. In his memory, the chances of a soul crystal dropping here were quite high. He quickly climbed into the crack. The rock crack was actually very shallow, but it was difficult to see from the outside. As soon as he got in, he saw the skeleton of the unlucky noble lying on the side. Surprisingly, every detail was the same as in the game. For a moment he almost had the illusion that he was still in the past world. However, Brando quickly calmed down. He carefully went around the skeleton, and his eyes fell on a small bag. He was slightly stunned because he saw a piece of parchment covered in dust. It was dry and brittle. There was no such thing in the game. He gently picked up the parchment and found that it was a suicide note. There were only a few short sentences written on it. Martha above, I may not be alive for long. If someone is lucky enough to see this suicide note after my death, I am willing to legally transfer all my belongings to this person. In addition, I have a secret ancestral property. I am willing to divide this wealth into 3 parts. 1 part will be given to this person, 1 part will be given to my wife, Sadie, and 1 part will be left to my daughter. The rest of the sentence was vague. If anyone who sees this suicide note is interested in this wealth, please pass this suicide note and my keepsake to my wife. Also tell her about the date at the Baden Ball. She will understand what I mean. Finally, I am sorry to say. May Lady Martha punish me? Brando finished reading and could not help but be stunned. He was more and more certain that he had never seen this thing before. The previous mission line was to remove the seal ring from the noble's finger bone and hand it to Braggs's citizen registration office for a reward. The mission line ended there and there was no follow-up. But what was the reason for this? Was it because this place was different from the game? Brando shook his head. He instinctively did not want to believe this judgment. At least everything he had discovered before was completely consistent. There was no reason for there to be an exception here. So what was the reason? He thought for a moment and suddenly thought of something. Could it be that only the first person who discovered this would receive such a mission? There were many unique missions and first missions in Amber, but there was also such a situation in the Instance Dungeon. No one had ever mentioned this before. He hesitated for a long time. He could only carefully fold the suicide note and the seal ring together, and then put them close to his body. He felt that this mission seemed a little familiar. Perhaps someone had completed it in the past. Unfortunately, the part about the noble's daughter's name and home address in the suicide note had become vague. Otherwise, this mission would be simple and clear. However, Brando did not care about this. The more troublesome the mission, the better the reward. At worst, he could start with Braggs's citizen registration office. At least he knew 2 clues, the noble's name and his wife's name. And that was a matter for the future. Now he had to face his own problems. After putting away the suicide note, he began to examine his spoils of war. There were 2 rubies in the cloth bag and some coins worth about 30 silver coins. This was a large sum of money. In addition, there was a pipe, a dark gray stone and a glass bead. Brando poured out these things and carefully looked through them. He was disappointed to find that there was no soul crystal. He could not help but sigh. If it was in the game, these rewards would be quite good. However, what he needed now was not materials or money, but items that could immediately increase his strength. But despite his disappointment, Brando still swept all these things into his waist bag. He did not have time to check if they were useful. Those were just decorations and miscellaneous items. In short, he had to be safe first. After cleaning up the loot, he glanced at the skeleton once more before returning to where he came from. Everything went smoothly, and when he returned to the crevice where Romaine and Freya were, he saw the 2 girls heave a sigh of relief. Brando, you're finally back. Without you, Freya and I were so nervous. There was no sound around, so it was very quiet. Roman patted her small chest and sighed. Don't drag me into this. Freya's face turned red. I just went to check the surroundings. There's only a patrol team outside, we have to kill them as soon as possible. Are we going out? We don't have to go out. We can wait until later and leave from the other side of the mountain path. That way we can avoid fighting, but we don't have much time. Brando replied. How much time? Freya asked. About 2 hours later. The girl was stunned. How far is Fortress Reden from here? Ever since she was young, the furthest she had been from home was Verbin. Although Fortress Reden was often mentioned by the adults, it was only an impression. Let's put it this way. If we were 2 hours later, we would have to race against Madara's undead army. Brando looked at Roman. We might reach Fortress Reden first, but we don't have much time left. Then will it be faster if we go out and kill that tree? She asked. There's a secret passage behind that tree. It was dug by merchants to avoid the checkpoints. I've seen it in the documents of Braggs when I was still in the Braggs militia. Our protagonist lied without batting an eyelid. But he didn't lie to Freya about the secret passage. He only knew about it in the game. Freya looked at him suspiciously. Is that tree dangerous? She pointed outside. It's very dangerous. We have a 50% chance of failing. Brando answered seriously. Although he really wanted to take a gamble and kill the golden demonic tree, he told himself that he had to tell Freya the truth about the risk because he had to be responsible for their lives. In a team, everyone had the right to choose for their own lives. This was the basic rule of the Amber Sword. No one could force anyone else. Freya was silent. What about you, Roman? She asked. Roman shook his head. I like to take risks. My life should be used for something meaningful. Freya looked away and nodded. I understand. Brando, please lead us to defeat it. If we fail, I won't regret it. Brando smiled. He didn't expect Freya to have such a big reaction. It's not that serious. I'll tell you how to deal with it. But first we have to take care of the patrol team. 6 demonic trees. You're already very familiar with them, but this time we have to end the battle in an instant. Then he brought the 2 to the edge of the crack and looked out. They could clearly see the golden demonic tree's descendants. Brando gestured to the area. We'll sneak in from here. Wait for my signal and attack. Before the battle starts, we have to be as slow as possible. We can't let them hear us. We have at least half an hour, so there's no need to rush. Freya. Yes. Roman and I will attack from the right. You hide under the rock on the left. When we attack, you attack the two at the back. Do you remember their weakness? Brando had Roman on his side to protect her and also to reduce the pressure on Freya. After all, the merchant girl didn't have much fighting strength. Freya nodded. The demonic tree's weakness was their four limbs. Because their sensory organs were all in their four limbs, they were no longer a threat if they lost their four limbs. But she was a little nervous. Before, they had used some unexpected tactics to deal with the demonic trees, such as falling rocks. This time they had to face them head-on and end the battle in an instant. She wasn't worried that Brando wouldn't be able to do it. But could she do it? Freya wasn't sure. Brando looked at her and understood what she was thinking. Every newbie had some kind of problem. Although Freya could be considered an NPC, she shouldn't be an exception. He thought for a moment and encouraged her, "Don't worry too much. Your half-body armor of the Wind Empress is very effective against them. You should attack without holding back." Freya nodded. P.S. I overslept, so I'm a little late. Sorry. Please bookmark and recommend this. Everyone, please support me. Chapter 45. The three of them silently sneaked down from the top of the valley. Time seemed to have stopped as their movements were so subtle that one would not notice anything out of the ordinary even if they were in the middle of the valley. He had walked this route over 100 times. It was not that he had not been discovered before, but that was when he was not familiar with it. Compared to now, it was impossible. Although the demonic trees were strong and aggressive, they were naturally blind and were not good at scouting. Compared to light, the transmission of sound was slower. However, the tense Brando could still hear the rustling sound of his boots rubbing against the rocks. He turned around and saw Freya staring back at him nervously. The young man could not help but frown. "You are still too nervous, Freya." He stopped to let the Roman pass him. The merchant girl did a good job. She lowered her body and breathed evenly. Her steps were not too big or too slow. She was as graceful and nimble as a kitten. She did not make too much noise. Her spirit was also cautious and excited at the moment. Her tense heartstrings stimulated more of her body's potential. The Roman always thought of herself as a natural merchant and adventurer. "Roman, you did well. Keep it up." Brando silently encouraged her with his mouth. The merchant girl quickly nodded. Her movements were small, but it could not hide the pride in her heart. Brando let the Roman pass and his gaze fell on Freya behind him. The girl seemed to know her own condition and could not help but lower her head. The young man saw this and sighed silently. This future goddess of war did not have the most outstanding talent in any aspect. Her intelligence, judgment, psychological quality, and physical quality seemed to have unknowingly determined that she was an ordinary person. But only Brendel knew that she must have some kind of potential that would allow her to achieve that legendary title one day. He could not help but look at her carefully. When she lowered her head, he could see a head of light brown hair. The hair was loose and soft, and it looked like her owner took care of it very carefully. It was not exquisite, but it was very meticulous. At this time, Freya had already lowered her body and passed by him. The girl did not utter a word. Only her long ponytail moved up and down with her movements, as if expressing her unyielding spirit. Brando knew that this was a unique kind of stubbornness. His heart skipped a beat. "Freya." Freya's movements in front of him paused. "You're too nervous. Relax." "I'm sorry, It's all right. Do you see that rock in front of us? We should split up from here. Hide behind there. When the patrol team passes by, you must immediately divert the attention of the last two demonic trees." Freya nodded. "You go first, I'll watch you here, Freya. I believe you can do a good job." Brando turned over, lying on his side in a piece of gravel, and gestured to her. The girl finally couldn't help but reveal an expression of surprise. This was different from the previous arrangement. But she was not a fool. She knew that Brando stayed behind to cheer her on. She was slightly moved, but at this time she could only purse her lips and nod. Brando saw that Freya continued to move forward, and her movements became more steady. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief. In fact, this kind of spontaneous reaction was very normal. There were not many people who were as gifted as the Roman. He turned around and saw that the merchant girl had stopped and looked at him with a curious face. He could not help but make a gesture to her to continue moving forward. Unfortunately, although her mental fortitude was top-notch, her thinking was too abnormal. Speaking of which, Freya was more reliable. He still looked forward to the day when the future goddess of war grew up. Freya quickly arrived at the predetermined position. The patrol team had just passed through half of the valley, and there were no accidents in the middle. Actually, there was no accident, but the girl was too nervous. But now Brando was in a bit of trouble. Because he stayed behind to encourage Freya, he delayed a bit of time. Now, the demonic trees had circled around half of the valley and were entering their ambush range. At this distance he was likely to be discovered. But Brando was Brando after all. He controlled the route and timing to the best, and there were no mistakes. When he crawled to Roman's side, even he could not help but wipe his sweat. He was really too nervous, but at least he did not let his emotions affect his performance. It was as perfect as in the game. Roman saw that he was sweating profusely, and hurriedly took out a checkered handkerchief from her bag and gave it to him. She did not say anything, but her thoughts were clear. Brando saw the checkered handkerchief and vaguely remembered that it was a handmade product from the northern Viro region. It was very rare to see similar goods in Bucci. It was also one of the merchant girl's favorite collections. Thank you. He used his mouth to express his gratitude word by word. I should be the one thanking you, Brando. The Roman girl hugged her bag with both hands and replied seriously, it will be very dangerous later, and there will be some things that we will not have the chance to say, right? That's why I want to tell you. Thank you, Brando. Brando was startled and then smiled slightly. In this short period of time, the 6 demonic trees had already approached. The 3 of them hid behind the sharp rocks, but they could still hear the rustling footsteps getting closer and closer. The demonic trees used some low notes to transmit information, and the communication between them and the demonic trees was only completed through telepathy. Brando saw that Freya had unsheathed her sword. She used her clothes to wrap the blade so that the reflection would not alert the demonic trees. Brando nodded. At least from this point he could see that Freya was no longer the little girl from a few days ago. He immediately made a hand gesture which meant, I'll go first, you sneak attack. Freya furrowed her brows. The other party always took on the most dangerous tasks, and this made her feel uneasy, and at the same time a little unconvinced. But even so, she knew that this was the most suitable choice, so she could only nod helplessly. The demonic trees passed through a promontory that extended out from the ground. Then they stopped and started searching in all directions. They also made a series of strange notes to communicate with each other. Brando pulled out the Thorn of Light and used one hand to protect the Roman. Then he sent an attack signal to Freya. At this moment, the demonic trees should be behind them and they were spread out. This was the best time to attack. Brando was the first to rush out. His first target was the adult demonic tree. Then it was Freya's turn. The girl decisively pulled out her sword and rushed towards the back of the demonic trees. Her target was the 2 golden demonic tree descendants that were standing closer to her. The demonic trees that stood at the back of the team were responsible for guarding, so their reaction was the fastest. The moment the 2 demonic trees discovered Freya, they turned around and let out a low growl. 4 vines shot out from their bodies like spears, and the vines pierced through the air with a shrill whistle. However, Freya parted her hands and blocked the 4 steel ropes. The wings of the wind glowed to protect her, allowing her to leap up and crash into the body of the first demonic tree. The wings of the wind dimmed for a moment, but immediately lit up again. However, the huge monster was also caught off guard and was sent flying. At this moment, the girl remembered Brando's words, your half-plate Wind Empress is very effective against them. You should attack with all your might. She clenched her teeth and pounced on the demonic tree that had fallen to the ground without any protection. The power of the demonic tree was like a tidal wave that wanted to send her flying. Freya knew that her strength was limited, and she could be sent flying at any time. She held her sword with both hands and raised it high. She aimed at the right arm of the demonic tree and slashed it down. With a light hiss, the right arm that was covered with vines was sent flying for a long time. However, Freya was also sent flying at the same time. Just as she got up, another demonic tree whipped her and she rolled a few times on the ground. Although the half-plate Wind Empress protected her, the impact still caused the girl to cough up blood. The demonic tree that had fallen to the ground would not be able to recover in a short time. Freya knew that she only had one enemy left. However, she wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and could not find any opportunity to attack. She could not help but take a light breath. On the other side, Brando had killed the enemy that was caught off guard. The Thorn of Light in his hand was like a dancing silver thread. The first sword pierced into the demonic tree's right rib, and then he swung his sword outwards, turning the demonic tree's right arm and a few vines into ashes. The second sword cut off the demonic tree's 2 legs. The moment the demonic tree lost its balance and fell, the cold edge of the elven sword had already swept across its neck. The demonic tree was turned into ashes in the intertwining net of light. Of course, this was because he took advantage of the surprise attack. Now he had to think of a way to deal with it. However, Brando had already planned for this. He immediately withdrew his sword and retreated. The demonic tree that had lost their comrade would not give up so easily. The 3 demonic trees immediately roared and chased after him. Brando had been waiting for this moment. When they chased him through a narrow path, the 3 demonic trees subconsciously lined up in a straight line to pass through. However, what awaited them was the shining silver ring on Brando's hand. Oasis. Freya heard a terrifying explosion from behind her left. She knew that it was the sound of Brando's attack. She could not help but relax. At the same time, she noticed that the enemy in front of her was stunned by the loud explosion. As a young girl from the countryside of Wuxia, she obviously didn't understand how big of an impact this sound explosion had on the sensitive demonic trees. The loud sound almost made them lose their ability to judge the outside world. It was as if the whole world was filled with a boundless white light, and nothing existed in the white light. However, she knew that this was an opportunity and that was enough. She raised her corroded sword that was almost broken, and viciously slashed at the demonic tree's legs. The short battle seemed to have ended with this slash. With a crisp sound, the demonic tree's tall body and her sword were split into 2. Freya could not believe that she had succeeded. She opened her mouth and saw the Roman panting while holding Madara's black steel sword in front of her. Roman? Freya, I'm sorry, Brando asked me to help you. The young girl smiled. It's okay, thank you. When Brando came out from behind the stone promontory, he saw this scene and could not help but be stunned. He originally thought that Freya was going to throw a tantrum, but unexpectedly, her reaction was not that big. Actually, his arrangement was not only to reduce the pressure on Freya, but also because of tactical considerations. This was because the focus of the ambush was on the ponytailed young girl. The entire demonic tree patrol team's focus was on their commander, the adult demonic tree, and the 2 demonic trees at the back of the team. As long as the 2 demonic trees were tied down, Brando could easily kill the adult demonic tree and lure the rest of the demonic trees away to carry out his plan. He did not want to give the enemy a chance to set up a formation and launch a counterattack. Otherwise, with 6 ranged monsters, even if Brando was 5 levels higher, he might not be able to protect Freya and Roman. But just as he was worried about how to explain it, Freya seemed to have understood. Why is the golden demonic tree not moving? The future Valkyrie also saw him and asked, can't it move? Brando was stunned, and only then did he regain his senses. He shook his head. It was not that the golden demonic tree did not move. On the contrary, the moment they attacked and attracted the golden demonic tree's attention, the terrifying monster had already launched its counterattack. It was just a soundless act. We have 1 minute. I will explain to you how to deal with the golden demonic tree. You must listen carefully if you do not want your souls to be trapped in the golden demonic tree forever. He replied. P.S. I am very happy to see the few long reviews in the book review section. The results are not good enough. Please continue to support me. Chapter 46. Under the clear sky, it was the brightest sunshine since spring. At the Bragg's River it should be like this in 4 or 5 months. The green meadow extended to the end of the river, the forest was filled with lush trees, and at the bend of the Golden River, a water wheel or a sawmill could be seen. The water was clear, and the pebbles on both sides of the river were carried downstream by the wind in the mountains to the Viro region. However, to the natives who were born and raised here, this river was like an endless poem that contained the wisdom of time. Brando thought so as he walked along the river, listening to the sounds in the forest. There was a bear in the forest, but it was not easy to see. In one of his memories, this was his grandfather's favorite place to bring him. But in another memory, this was the beginner's area that he was most familiar with. The forest was filled with small animals of a certain level, and the bear was a local boss that dropped a piece of good leather. The 2 memories merged and intertwined in his mind. The third memory was about the golden demonic tree. Looking at the familiar scenery, he could not help but think back to a few minutes ago. Freya Roman. I'll keep it short. You should have noticed that the golden demonic tree is able to control so many demon servants and children through the mind. The true ability of the golden demonic tree is the power of the mind. The power of the mind? Roman, don't interrupt. I'm sorry, Freya. Yes, the power of the mind. It can pry into thoughts, control people's hearts, create mysterious illusions and imprison souls. Brando replied, in fact, when we were dealing with the demonic trees, the golden demonic tree had already begun to influence our thoughts, because it has been having a long dream, and this dream will soon merge with you and me. Dream? Yes, soon we will enter our own dreams. You will see some unbelievable things there, but before that I have something to tell you. Brando pointed to the center of the valley, and there the golden demonic tree was becoming more and more beautiful in their eyes. Its branches seemed to stretch out in all directions, exuding a vigorous vitality. This was the manifestation of the golden tree's dream extending to the real world. In the game, the tree herders gave the golden tree the god's blood to awaken it, but it also caused the elven holy trees to fall into an eternal dream. These dreams were all fragments and bits of information about a dark world. Mortals would fall into madness even if they only took a peek. Even a fragment of these dreams could be fatal to players. Once players got involved, they could lose their lives at any time. However, in order to fight against the golden demonic tree, he had no choice but to enter its dreamscape. This would be the first stage of the battle against the golden demonic tree, the illusion realm. Originally, this stage of the battle was unanimously agreed by the players to be the most difficult in the game, but the guild called Muda used a clever method to solve the problem. This method was still a secret in the early days, but Brando happened to come from an era when it was widely spread among the players. Coincidentally, the resources he had with him were just enough to complete this plan. But this was still not enough. Because once the first stage was over, the second stage of the battle in the real world would depend on true strength to determine victory and defeat. Originally, this stage was relatively simple in the game, but on the contrary, it was difficult for Brando and the others to complete. There was no other reason. Most of the players in the game who entered this dungeon had an average level of 25 and above, but Brando, who was the highest level among the three, was only level 10. Even with the help of top-grade equipment, it would be difficult to end the battle before the rotten beasts arrived in 15 minutes. This was the reason why Brendel's abacus immediately shifted to the golden demonic tree when he held the card of fate, Holy Sword. Because as long as he used the card of fate well, it seemed that all the conditions to kill the golden demonic tree would be met. Main point. Freya's voice pulled him back to reality. Brando was stunned for a moment before he nodded. Because the golden demonic tree's dreamscape entered our dreamscape, you must remember that you are the master of this dream. Therefore, no matter how it constructs this dream, no matter how fierce the beasts it creates, it will not exceed your limits. He remembered that in the game, in this scenario, the golden demonic tree would release some of the strongest monsters that the players had encountered in the dream, and then recreate that scene. But it was not that simple. Here, the players would receive distress points, and when they made mistakes or suffered more injuries, the distress points would increase, and the monsters would also become stronger. Therefore, this battle would often be due to the monsters becoming stronger and the players becoming weaker and weaker. In the end, it would enter a vicious cycle, and the players would not be able to resist and it would be declared over. Brando did not know how the distress points would behave in the real world, but there was only one core. That was to be full of confidence in oneself, and to ensure that one would enter the battle in the best possible condition. Only then would one be able to obtain victory. He pointed at his own forehead and looked seriously at Roman and Freya. Focus your attention, and ensure that your fighting spirit is high. A person's willpower attribute. Don't interrupt, Roman. Brando replied unhappily, I'm talking about willpower. A person's willpower is not fixed. It will fluctuate according to your condition, and when you focus your attention and ensure that your fighting spirit is high, your willpower will always be at its peak. The stronger your willpower, the harder it will be for the golden demonic tree to manipulate your negative emotions. You must not be controlled by your negative emotions, or else the consequences will be very serious. How serious? The future merchant girl looked at him with her bright eyes. Brando did not answer. He was afraid that his words would make them too nervous. Nervousness was also a type of negative emotion. Because failure meant that the soul would be trapped in the golden demonic tree's trunk forever, until the golden demonic tree was burned to ashes. Only then would the soul be released. But release also meant death. The surroundings gradually became hazy. But Brando did not explain the rules because there was a rule in this battle. When the first person woke up, he could enter the next person's dream and pass on a message to his companions, allowing them to defeat the nightmare more easily. But everyone in the team only had one chance, so the guilds would usually set up a chain of awakening. The strongest person in the team would be the first to enter the dream, then the second strongest and the third strongest. This way, when the strongest person in the guild woke up first, they would be able to help the people below. This sequence would prevent the team from losing too many people in the first stage. Now Brando planned to change this sequence. "I'll be the first to enter the dream," he said, then Freya and finally Roman. "How do we enter the dream?" Freya asked. "You just have to close your eyes." "I'll be the first to close my eyes, then you, then Roman." Brando almost bit his tongue. He immediately reached out his hand to press on Roman's eyelids, because he saw that the merchant lady was about to close her eyes to give it a try. "Ah!" Roman couldn't help but cry out when Brando's hand pressed on his forehead. "Curiosity killed the cat, miss. So sorry. The world of magic and the mind is very dangerous, you have to be careful." Brando sighed. His plan was like this. He was the most confident, so he should be the first to enter the dream. Freya was behind him because he believed that the future goddess of war would be the most difficult to defeat. Because there were too many obstacles in her heart, the more dangerous it would be. But with an experienced person like him by her side, it shouldn't be too dangerous. On the other hand, the naive Roman should be able to escape the golden demonic tree's control easily. With Freya's help, success was inevitable. The time limit for the first stage was 5 minutes, and in the dream, it was extended to half an hour. If they couldn't escape in this time, they would still be trapped by the golden demonic tree. It seemed like a plan with a high chance of success. At least Brando didn't find any problems with it. If they succeeded, then other than the handsome rewards, they would have ample time to move around Fortress Reden. No one knew better than Brendel about Fortress Reden's current situation and what it would become in the future. If they wanted to find Romaine's aunt and escape successfully, every second they had was a little bit more hope. He patted the thorn of light on his waist and took a deep breath. The golden demonic tree's dream was very realistic, and when he took a deep breath, his lungs were filled with the smell of wet soil. It was the smell of March or April, the green grass and the growing forest. But why did the golden demonic tree's boss throw him here? Did it think that the strongest monster he met was the old brown bear in the forest? That was good, it was only a level 16 rare elite, he could easily deal with it. But in Brando's memory, the golden demonic tree wasn't that kind. On the contrary, these creatures that were distorted by the blood of God were the purest of evil creatures, and their evil was unreasonable. But calculating the time, it should be about time to trigger the storyline, right? Even though he had been in this world for a few days, Brando still used the word trigger subconsciously. It was just a habit. At this moment he heard the sound of metal clashing. Brando's ears twitched. For someone like him who was familiar with swordsmanship, level 3 military swordsmanship, he could tell that it was a duel between two people. But it wasn't intense and it seemed like they were just practicing. Brando didn't choose to avoid it, because he knew that there was no point in avoiding it in the dream. And avoiding danger meant cowardice, which was a negative emotion, and the golden demonic tree might take advantage of it. He followed the source of the sound and found that it came from behind the water wheel of the sawmill not far away. And when he got closer, his line of sight went around the towering water wheel, and he saw two people he didn't expect to see. It was an old man with a head full of silver hair and white sideburns. He wore a dark blue uniform and held a sword in his hand. Just by standing there he naturally gave off a towering aura like a mountain. But what made Brando's heart skip a beat was the old man's expression. There was a sense of dignity in his solemn expression, and if someone with a guilty conscience saw him, they would immediately avoid his gaze. The other person was a little boy holding a wooden sword. Perhaps he didn't look any different from an ordinary child, but in Brando's eyes, he had a different meaning. He immediately recognized that this was Brando, or more accurately, the young Brando. He was shocked and raised his head, immediately realizing who the old man was. That must be Brando's grandfather, a veteran of the November War, and a recipient of the Candlelight Medal. Damn, that's incredible. Although Erwin is old, the medal of the Holy Cathedral of Fire isn't that easy to obtain. But this time, the dream set by the golden demonic tree seemed to be different from the one in the game. Brando's heart tightened. But with this hesitation, he immediately felt that the aura of Brando's grandfather in front of him was becoming more and more stable, and it was beginning to affect his state of mind. Negative emotions. Brando immediately realized that he was unknowingly being affected. This was different from the game. After all, the system in the game couldn't control people's thoughts, but it was completely different here. This way the battle would be much more difficult than in the game. Brando couldn't help but take a deep breath and press on his wallet. Fortunately, he still had his biggest trump card. Although it was unexpected, the situation was still under control. Thinking of this, he calmed down. The old man's gaze also stopped on him, and after a while, he opened his mouth and said, "Young man, do you have the qualifications to inherit everything from my grandson?" This sentence made Brando's body tremble slightly. P.S. This chapter and the next few chapters will reach the climax. I poured a lot of emotions into these chapters and I cried as I wrote them. I hope everyone will like them. With tears in my eyes, please recommend them. Chapter 47. Brando was greatly shaken. This was his biggest secret in this world. Although he and Brando were one, it was still difficult to explain where the memories of the two lives came from. Although he had accepted everything, it was inevitable that there would be a knot in his heart. Who would have thought that this secret hidden in his heart would be torn apart by the golden demonic tree? That's not right, but he immediately shook his head. The golden demonic tree's spirit could not have penetrated into his heart so quickly. That monster was using his habits. Why would Brando's grandfather say something like that? Brando suddenly understood. It must be because he thought that the old man would say something like that. Only people would understand what they were afraid of, and in this world, his enemy was himself. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he realized that his spiritual defense line had not changed hands, the feeling of being exposed in front of the enemy disappeared, and he quickly calmed down. The golden demonic tree's first attack was coincidentally neutralized by him using his previous life's experience, and his spirit became even more stable. He could not help but cry out in relief. He pulled out the thorn of light and replied, "Whether I have the qualifications or not, we will know after a test." The old man nodded. "Not bad, that's more like a man of the Damon family. However, there are too many people in this world who talk big, and I do not wish for my descendants to be such incompetent people." Brando's heart skipped a beat. This was not a test. Brando's grandfather's reaction was Brando's self-affirmation. This meant that his self-confidence was gradually recovering, and this was a sign that his spirit was reaching the peak of stability. This was a good sign. Brando signaled his grandfather to make the first move. Even if it was a dream, he was still facing his own elder. Out of politeness and self-confidence, he should also be courteous. In the golden demonic tree's dream, blindly taking the first move was not a sign of one's strength having the upper hand, but rather an undetectable trap that the evil creature had set for one. Only by guarding every weakness in one's human nature could one not let it take advantage of them. The old man nodded again. He took a step forward with his left foot and placed his sword behind his left arm. Brando could not help but feel his scalp tingle when he saw this. Even he himself had not reached this level of swordsmanship back then. As for Breton, Freya and the others, their swordsmanship was nothing compared to this. "Brando, who was your grandfather?" As this thought flashed through his mind, Brando felt the sword in his hand become heavier. He couldn't help but curse out loud. His fear had actually been caught by the golden demonic tree. How was he supposed to live? He also assumed a defensive stance. As he did not have any other sword skills, he chose a more mature defensive stance from the military sword skills. In front of such a seasoned swordsman, it was meaningless for him to put on the airs of the high-level swordsmanship he had used in the past. Without the accumulation of experience, just putting on airs in front of Brando's grandfather was equivalent to saying that he was full of flaws. As an experienced warrior, Brando deeply understood this point. The old man did not say anything, and with a flash of his sword, he attacked. Brando discovered that his grandfather's sword was not fast, but it was steady, so steady that it was frightening. Using the words of a professional warrior to describe it, it was as if there were no flaws at all from the front. It was clearly an ordinary sword strike, but it felt as if all the gaps in the sword were within the range of the opponent's counterattack. He sucked in a breath of cold air. This was the swordsmanship that Brando remembered from his grandfather's memories? No wonder he was able to obtain the candlelight medal. This monstrous swordsmanship, no wonder Brando's talent in swordsmanship was so outstanding. It turned out that they came from the same lineage. He could not help but think that if this old man's background was slightly better, he would have been directly conferred the title of knight. Brando did not have any room to counterattack, so he could only seal off his opponent's space for further attacks. With a clang, the two swords collided. Such a strong force, Brando was secretly shocked. But before he could recover from his shock, he felt his opponent's sword become heavier. F***ck your mother's golden demonic tree. Of course, Brando knew what was going on. This was simply seamless. Compared to this, the golden demonic tree in the game was simply like a toy. What was a master at manipulating people? This was it. But at this moment, Brando did not feel afraid at all. Instead, he felt a strong desire to fight. He stared into his grandfather's eyes. The old man's expression had always been as calm as water, but it was as if he could see through people's hearts. Brando suddenly felt that it was very strange. Why would such an outstanding grandfather be so indifferent in Brando's heart? When he first saw this old man, he even had to rely on his childhood memories to confirm that this was indeed his grandfather. This was clearly not normal. He searched through his own memories. Brando's memories of his grandfather seemed to be that he was strict and unsmiling. Then there were the candlelight metal and the heavy halo of the veteran of the November War. And the other memories of this grandfather were not even as deep as the old house and the oil painting. But how could a grandfather and grandson who had been together for a few years become strangers when they met again? Even his grandfather's voice and appearance had gradually faded away. Brando did not seem like such a person. He once again blocked the old man's sword. Clang. The sound of metal clashing rang out. He felt the sword in his hand become heavier, and it almost flew out of his hand. Brando was shocked. He could not help but look at the old man. The old man's expression became serious, as if he was somewhat dissatisfied. 10 years, I'm still not grandfather's match. Brando could not help but read the message in his heart. Not good, I am doubting myself. He was shocked. A crack appeared in his spirit defense line, and his attacks became more and more disorderly. He was actually knocked to the ground by the old man's attack. Our protagonist's heart turned cold, and he hurriedly climbed up from the grass. But when he climbed up and looked back, there was no grass. This was clearly a gray house. That's right, this was Butchie's old house. That night he woke up here and came to this world. Brando's forehead was covered in cold sweat. This meant that the golden demonic tree's invasion had deepened. He could not help but reach for his pouch, which contained the key to overcoming this situation. But he hesitated. Should he use a trick? He suddenly felt a sense of unwillingness. He raised his head and looked at the old man's face. It was Brando's grandfather's face. The old man's face was still serious, and his wrinkled face had a hint of disappointment. This disappointment deeply pierced him. It was as if Brando's 20 years of memories had suddenly become clear. It was as if they wanted to leave his body and fight his grandfather alone. I can do it. Let me do it. He suddenly had such a thought. He knew that it was Brando's emotions that were affecting him. He had already integrated into this world, into the memories of his family. But he shook his head. No, maybe this was the golden demonic tree taking advantage of his weakness? He had to immediately use that technique to leave this dream. But when he put his hand on that position, he could not help but be shocked. Because he saw the disappointment on the old man's face become more and more obvious. No, I can't abandon Brendel. But you have to understand that the golden demonic tree is taking advantage of Brando's weakness. But even so, it is still a part of me. You will fail. But abandoning your weakness does not mean that you have won against yourself. Brando suddenly calmed down. He suddenly realized why Brando's grandfather did not say a single word from the moment he attacked. Although the old man had many chances to completely destroy Brando's psychological defenses, and although the old man's face was filled with disappointment, he did not say anything. But the old man didn't say anything. He just watched and waited quietly. Brando suddenly felt a bolt of lightning piercing through his soul, illuminating every dark corner of his heart. He suddenly understood that this was not because the golden demonic tree had pity for Brando. No, it was because that young man was still protecting the last piece of pure land in his soul. Then why? Brando could not help but raise his head to look at the old man's solemn, slightly sighing face. That face hidden in the shadows of the old house seemed to be hiding something. Was it disappointment? It was disappointment. His entire body suddenly trembled. What was that disappointment waiting for? It was unspoken hope, Brando. That was the grandfather in Brando's memories. That stern and deep gaze was filled with disappointment towards this young man's growth, but this deep disappointment was not blame. It was hope that one day Brando would understand the familial love behind this hope. Family would never truly blame you. They would only wait for the day you understand. Perhaps one day they would grow old, perhaps one day they would no longer exist in this world, but they would still remain in your heart, waiting for the day you understand. Waiting for you to understand their love for you. Brando raised his head, his hand tightly gripping his sword. He raised his head, holding back his tears. He had always thought that he had understood this world, but he never thought that he did not understand anything. Brando, do you still remember what I told you? Your spine must be as straight as your sword. As a man of the Damon family, You must live with your head held high. You're my grandson. You are the best in my heart. The old man raised the sword in his hand again. Come, let me see what you've learned in the 10 years since I left. Brando nodded, his face already filled with tears. This was his grandfather's words, but it was also not. This was the answer he gave himself in his heart. This was the path that Brando wanted. He took a deep breath. The two swords crossed. Stand up, Brando. How can the men of the Damon family be so weak? What are you crying for? Can a scratch kill you? Tell me, how do you want me to punish you this time? In his memory, his grandfather should be the one who sat sternly in the position of a parent, silent, and looked at him with a disappointed gaze. In his memory, his grandfather should be the one who was always dissatisfied with everything he did. However, the old man in his memory had finally finished the last journey of his life. Brando stood in front of the wooden bed, feeling his grandfather's hand gently placed on his head, just like when he was a child by the Brags River. However, in the end, his grandfather's hand lost its strength and brushed across his young face. It was so rough, but it made people feel that they could rely on him. Was that sigh still a disappointment in the end, or was it a heavy responsibility and hope? Brando felt that his grandfather's dream was disintegrating around him, and he held the candlelight metal in his hand that was disappearing into specks of dust. He did not say anything for a long time. Thank you, old man. Thank you, grandfather. Requesting votes. Requesting votes. Chidian Chinese website welcomes readers to read the latest, fastest and hottest serialized works from Chidian Originals. Chapter 48. Waking up from his grandfather's dream, Brando opened his eyes and felt that his forehead was cold. He looked at the gloomy sky and couldn't help but let out a long sigh. In the game, there were ways to rely on equipment and skills that could instantly increase one's willpower to break free from the cage of willpower. For example, his innate talent was one of them. But he felt that this was not the best way to solve the problem. No matter what, he who had merged with Brando's memories could not give up the other part of his soul. He was not just one of the two, but the whole soul represented by Sophie and Brando. If he could not look at Brando's weakness, one day he would not be able to look at his own weakness. Only by understanding himself correctly could he fully accept the past. This kind of growth was not only in the mind. Just Brando's acknowledgement of his past had given him a lot of benefits. He did not expect that Brando's swordsmanship was actually taught by his grandfather. These memories of the past were sealed away by Brando's subconscious with a sense of self-abandonment. Until now, the memories of his childhood swordsmanship had finally been revived and integrated into his soul. What kind of swordsmanship was this? Brando had once sealed away the swordsmanship taught by his grandfather because he subconsciously thought that he was not qualified to use it. But even so, the swordsmanship talent that had seeped into his bones since he was a child still made him the undisputed leader of the Anzac militia. Our protagonist could not help but open his stats list and saw that it had become militia, military swordsmanship, level 3+1, fighting skills, level 3, tactical theory, level 0, military organization, level 0. Training skills could not exceed the level of a profession, but the level of skills obtained through equipment and quests did not count. Level 4 swordsmanship was the standard of a normal person who had practiced swordsmanship for 30 to 40 years. It was definitely not appropriate for an 18 or 19-year-old to have such a level. But Brando felt that as long as he completely absorbed the essence of his grandfather's swordsmanship, his military swordsmanship could reach level 4 by another 30% without a problem. And when he thought of the old man's swordsmanship, he felt a chill. That was at least level 10 Erwin's military swordsmanship. Brando's grandfather was really a legend. He sat up from the ground with mixed thoughts and couldn't help but look towards the center of the valley. The hazy feeling from the golden demonic tree dissipated a little, which meant that the power of the dreamscape was weakening. He turned back to look at Freya and Roman. Freya's eyes were closed and she frowned occasionally. Romain's face was pale, but her expression was calm. Fortunately, the situation was not as bad as he had imagined. The next step was to inject faith. As long as everything went smoothly, the golden demonic tree would not be that difficult to deal with. He crawled to Freya's side and pressed his finger between her eyebrows. After a moment of hesitation, he chose faith. The golden demonic tree used negative emotions to lure people into its trap, so players had to respond with positive emotions. Brando observed Freya's behavior and believed that the stubbornness and persistence on the surface were actually a layer of protection for the weakness in her heart. He hoped that the future Valkyrie could be more confident. Only confidence could make people mature. But he couldn't help but think that they did not guard against him at all. In this state, it would be very easy for him to take advantage of them. He could not help but look at Romaine and Freya, who were sleeping soundly, especially the latter's forehead that was as smooth as jade. He could not help but have the delusion of wanting to get close to her. Brando's heart thumped and he quickly calmed himself down. Although he liked Romaine, he wasn't a shameless person. He rubbed his forehead, and his mind was filled with all kinds of strange thoughts. He couldn't help but think of his dream. After leaving the dreamscape, his mentality was completely different. That feeling of gaining something and losing something made him more mature. He knew that he would not turn back. The meaning of time was that after generations of repetition, everyone had to walk their own path. He was the same. After understanding Brando's goal, he also had to plan for his own future. Only he knew that the War of the Black Rose would end quickly. This war only lasted from the end of May to the end of July in the game, and the nobles were not willing to be involved in a war. This coincided with Madara's idea. The external invasion was an external manifestation of the country's internal changes, but Madara didn't want to provoke the entire Light faction, so retreating was inevitable. Since both sides on the battlefield were unwilling to fight for a long time, then the negotiation of peace was a done deal. But that was more like a farce. Brando knew that the heroine he was willing to fight for was not the current heroine. He was waiting for the Princess Regent to ascend the throne. Of course, he couldn't just do nothing. He thought that after the war ended, the royal family would definitely commend some people. On one hand, they would establish heroes, and on the other hand, they would appease the people. Maybe there would be a recommendation for the Basta Royal Cavalry Academy like in history. However, Brando wasn't interested in this recommendation. To be honest, he wasn't interested in joining Erwin's old system, but it was a good idea to let Freya study there. What was he going to do? Brando couldn't help but think that this was the beginning of a chaotic world. After all, a person's strength was limited. He needed a territory, and he needed to gather some people to support his ideals. He knew that with his knowledge of history and the world, he would be able to quickly grow his territory, but where should he start? Should he go through Erwin's internal system? Not to mention that he didn't have enough time. He also didn't want to be involved in a war too early. He had to keep a low profile so that he wouldn't be noticed by the truly powerful forces. As for taking over a mountain and becoming a king, there was no need to think about it. The reason was the same as above. The other way was to go down the path of a pioneer. There were pioneers in the game, and there were also pioneers in real life. In this dark world, not all territories were under the control of the nobles. At the borders of the kingdom, where civilization and wilderness intersected, there were still many undeveloped virgin lands. Erwin had such a decree since the beginning of the Ain dynasty. As long as a pioneer discovered a new territory, he or she could immediately legally occupy it, and he or she would be awarded a title according to the size of the territory. These titles weren't hereditary, and most of the land would be taken back by the royal family and the Holy Cathedral after 3 generations. However, there were still many who were willing to seek an opportunity to make a name for themselves. Among them, there were gamblers, adventurers, mercenaries, illegal merchants, and even Templar knights and clergymen with proper backgrounds. There was no difference between them here. Brando couldn't help but get excited when it came to such virgin lands. He knew that there were many at the borders of Erwin. Although there were differences in size, at least it was a choice. However, when it came to the selection, our protagonist couldn't help but hesitate. He didn't need much of a development advantage or geographical location. The key was to be hidden, and it was best to start from the few territories with ruins. After all, he was alone and lacked manpower and resources. Through the ruins of cities in the game, he could save a lot of effort. He thought for a moment and finally thought of a place. That place was known as the most legendary territory in the game. Later, because of the owner's mistake, it was burned down by his enemies. However, this place was still discussed enthusiastically on the forums for a long time. He remembered that he had seen countless people say, if Valhalla was still there, it would be a different scene now. Brando couldn't help but get excited when he thought of this. How could he not have thought of this before? If that legendary territory wasn't destroyed, its final development would be beyond everyone's expectations. He didn't expect that this daydream would come true in his hands. While he was daydreaming, he suddenly felt the person beside him move slightly. Then Freya opened her eyes. She saw Brando put a hand on her forehead and was slightly startled at first. But then the confusion in the future Valkyrie's eyes faded like the tide. She suddenly woke up and shrunk back, looking at Brando with a red face. Even if she didn't speak, Brando could see clearly what was written on her face. "Shameless, what are you doing?" He shook his head and was about to explain, but Freya seemed to have reacted first. She seemed to have suddenly remembered something, and the blush on her cheeks deepened. "I'm sorry, It's okay, go give Roman an alarm clock and tell her to get up." Brando pretended to be relaxed and replied, "Alarm clock." Brando coughed and realized that he had said something wrong. Then he explained in detail the reason and use of the faith injection. He thought it was a simple matter, but he didn't expect Freya's face to change after hearing it. Why don't you give Roman first?" She stood up nervously and asked. Brando was stunned. "No matter how you look at it, you're the one with a weak heart, Valkyrie." But before he finished thinking, Freya had already rushed over and helped Roman up from the ground. Romain's face was still pale, but her expression was calm. But Brando was surprised to see that when Freya helped the soft Romain up, 2 lines of tears fell from her eyelashes. What's going on? He couldn't imagine Roman crying. "I'll tell you later." Freya took a deep breath and put a hand on Roman's forehead, but there was no reaction. She was stunned for a moment and immediately said, "Turn your head." "What for?" "Turn around, hurry up, don't look." Brando was stunned but immediately nodded. But his curiosity was no less than Romain's when she was awake. After a while he couldn't help but sneak a peek behind him. He immediately saw Freya holding Roman with both hands and hugging him. She touched his forehead and anxiously muttered, "Little Roman, wake up, did you forget our promise?" He couldn't help but be stunned. He knew that Freya and Roman had a good relationship, but he didn't expect that Romain would have her own little secret. But before he could recover from his shock, he saw Freya staring at him fiercely. Sorry, he saw it himself. Brando avoided the topic. You're shameless." Freya scolded with a red face. Sorry. P.S. There was a power outage in the morning, so it was a bit late. Regarding the explanation of the deletion in the book review section, some of the posts were deleted because of inappropriate words, so they weren't deleted randomly. Please forgive me. Chapter 49. However, the Roman situation was not as optimistic as Brando had imagined. As time passed, the atmosphere became more and more tense. Brando finally understood that this future merchant girl's heart must be hiding a secret that he did not know. This secret might be subconscious, and the deeper it was hidden, the greater the damage would be. For a moment, only the sound of their breathing could be heard. The merchant girl was sleeping peacefully, but Brando was afraid that she would never wake up again. He could not help but look at the golden demonic tree. The connection between the dream and reality was very weak, and the golden demonic tree could wake up at any time. Freya? Freya clenched her fist and was so nervous that she could not say a word. Brando had said that they only had 5 minutes and there was not much time left, but the Roman still seemed to be immersed in his own nightmare. But she knew that she could not blame the young man, because she was the only one in Bucci who knew this secret. She hated herself for not telling Brando in advance, but how would she know that the dream was so complicated? Brando did not say anything because he was afraid that it would affect their state of mind, but he did not expect that it would backfire on him. However, the young man did not fall into a state of panic. His thoughts turned quickly, and he suddenly threw the thorn of light in his hand over. Let her hold it. What? This sword has the power of exorcism, let her hold it. Brando said that, but he knew that he could only rely on the elven treasure sword. An increase of 1 willpower would allow the merchant girl to turn the misfortune into a blessing. Martha Buff. He could not help but pray to the omnipresent wound in his heart, hoping that she would be more lenient towards the Roman. But perhaps the sword had an effect, or perhaps Brando's prayer was heard by Martha. Not long after, the merchant girl actually woke up with a She rubbed her eyes and looked at the two of them. She was stunned for a moment before she happily said, Freya, you're here too. Let me tell you, I just had a nightmare. Freya was stunned, and then she let out a surprised cry from her chest. She didn't even listen to what Romain was saying. Instead, she hugged the Roman and cried tears of joy. She thought that there was no hope, but Brando's method really worked. Roman, you idiot. Foo, Freya, what are you saying? I'm not an idiot. Roman defended himself in a fluster as if he had been dealt a fatal blow. On the other hand, Brando calmed down when he saw that Freya was flustered. With the help of faith and thorn of light, no matter how deep the nightmare was, the Roman would have a high chance of waking up. He was more worried about how she would be affected. But looking at her dazed expression, Brando knew that he was overthinking things. "Alright, don't cry," he said. "The golden demonic tree is about to wake up. If you have anything to say, save it for after the battle." The ponytailed girl stopped crying and nodded. "What should we do, Brando?" she asked. "We are not the main characters of this battle. There is a stone worm in this valley." "What is that?" "Roman, don't interrupt. The stone worm is a type of elemental creature from the Earth's pivot, Earth elemental plane. They are born to be the nemesis of the golden demonic tree, but before this stone worm reaches adulthood, the golden demonic tree can still rely on its huge roots to keep it outside the valley. Of course, the stone worm needs 80 to 120 years to reach adulthood. We can't wait that long, so we have to help it." "Help it?" Freya asked. Brando took the elven sword from Roman and answered, "The golden demonic tree's body is very weak. Its only attack is to use its roots to pierce through the ground. So we have to force it to do this. The more roots it uses, the less roots it has to defend against the stone worm. Over time, the stone worm will be able to enter the valley, but we only have 10 minutes. At most, the first batch of rotten beasts will enter the valley in 10 minutes. If we don't succeed in 10 minutes, you have to run west without hesitation. That secret passage is in the valley and it is very obvious." "What about you?" Roman looked up. "Leave the rest to the men. This is the demeanor of a lady." Brando looked at her smooth forehead and couldn't help but lightly touch it. He then looked at Freya. The girl was using both her hands to tie up her ponytail to facilitate the battle. She noticed his gaze and nodded at him. Brando was stunned. He thought that Freya would force herself to stay, but she didn't look like she was unwilling. Instead, she looked more calm. It seemed that she had gained something from the dream. The capable Freya had the aura of a future Valkyrie. He couldn't help but smile, then turned back and said, "Roman, put on your ring." Immediately, Romaine raised her hand proudly and waved the black and white ring in front of him. "Your mission is to listen to the movements underground. If you find anything, immediately tell us." "Okay, Brando. Then let's go. We will go through the rocky promontory and approach the golden demonic tree. Looking at the terrain, there should be a fault below that will delay the golden demonic tree from noticing our intentions," Brando said as he took the lead. He first ran to a protruding rock, then turned back and gestured to Freya and Roman to follow him. Freya grabbed Roman's hand and followed him. Her meaning was obvious: "Be good and don't run around, I will protect you." She did this to let Brando have nothing else to worry about, so that he could take the opportunity to attack the golden demonic tree. The three of them quickly passed through the rocky promontory that Brando had mentioned. His memory was correct and they hadn't been disturbed at all. But just as they entered the boundary, Romaine immediately heard a rumbling sound coming from below. "Brando, there's a sound below." Our protagonist was shocked and immediately shouted, "Split up, split up." Freya immediately pushed Roman to the side. The three of them split up, and the ground was immediately torn apart by two thick vines. However, the golden demonic tree didn't expect that its attack would be seen through by a few insects. When its roots reached out from the ground, it was only waiting for Brando's sword. The youth climbed up from the ground and raised the elven sword with both hands. He slashed at the center of the vines that were as thick as a water bucket, and the sword went halfway into the vines. Silver flames immediately gushed out from the tip of the sword. The purifying flames burned the vines, and the golden demonic tree in the middle of the valley trembled in pain, causing the entire valley to hum. "It's calling for reinforcements again." Brando's heart sank. As expected, time was running out. He couldn't help but turn back. Freya had beautifully dodged the golden demonic tree's roots, and slashed at the vines with her sword. Even though the sword only went a third of the way into the vines, it was a beautiful move that made him look at her in a new light. This was at least the standard of a level 2 Erewhon military swordsmanship. It seemed like Freya had gained quite a lot from her dream. "Brando, there's a sound again." Roman crawled to the edge of the battlefield and shouted back. "How far is it?" Brando instinctively shouted, but he immediately realized his slip of the tongue. He had unconsciously treated the Roman as the team's nightingale, but the merchant girl was only a little more sensitive and was not a professional scout in the game. 100 meters, maybe 70 meters. Roman thought for a while. That far. Brando was startled, and used his sword to deflect the vines that were attacking him. The remaining half of the roots lost its vitality and fell limply to the ground. The area where it was cut was charred black. "There's still 60 meters left." Brando hesitated for a while. Even though he found it hard to believe, he still decided to trust the Roman. "Freya, don't worry about it. Do you see that small path? We'll rush out from there. Freya was startled for a moment, but she immediately placed her sword in front of her chest and let the vine whip her away. The wings of the wind that surrounded her lit up one by one, forming a net of light that protected her and lessened the impact. The ponytailed girl only rolled a few times on the ground before she got up, and she had already landed beside Roman. Roman, follow me. She then grabbed the merchant girl's hand and rushed in that direction. Hey, where's Brando? He'll catch up. This girl finally learned to trust her teammates and not to be stubborn. Brando couldn't help but feel relieved. He was really afraid that Freya would get mixed up with him at this time. But when he saw that the vine attacking Freya still wanted to chase after her, he didn't hesitate to cut it in half. After clearing the enemy, he didn't dare to stay any longer. He could clearly hear the sound from underground, which meant that the Roman's judgment was correct. But he couldn't help but be shocked. How did the careless girl hear the sound from 70 meters underground? He estimated that her perceptive sense had to be at least 5 ounces to be able to do so. This thought flashed through Brando's mind and he immediately turned around and ran. With his agility, it wasn't difficult for him to catch up to Freya and Roman, but the three of them were blocked by the golden demonic tree's roots. On the third time, the three of them heard a loud noise coming from the southeast of the valley, and all the tree roots that were attacking them suddenly retreated. Now, even if Brando didn't remind them, Freya and Roman knew that it was the stone worm. Did we win? Roman couldn't help but ask in surprise. Brando shook his head. They still had to enter the core area around the golden demonic tree. In the following time, the golden demonic tree would constantly consider which side posed a greater threat to it, and then use its huge roots to block one side. But this kind of action wouldn't last long, and there would be a moment when they would win. But the only question was whether they could do all this within the stipulated time. There were less than 5 minutes left. P.S. After going to Sanjiang, there are a lot of problems. Please recommend me. Chapter 50. A rumbling sound came from the south, followed by another half a minute later. Brando listened carefully and confirmed that the rockworm had passed through the rocky valley. The creature's mouth was filled with 13,000 steel needle-like teeth. Not only could it easily pierce through the soil, it could also chew through the hardest rocks. Brando had seen an adult rockworm before. It was about 30 meters long and required 3 people to encircle it. These creatures from the rockworm had shockingly high defense. 40 ounces of Bran's greatsword couldn't even break through its shell, let alone cause any damage. The golden demonic tree boss had sent the rockworm straight in, which meant that it had shifted its focus to the 3 of them. Brando couldn't help but curse. The rockworm was about a mile away from the center of the forbidden orchard where the golden demonic tree was rooted. The rockworm would need at least 20 minutes and 30 seconds to pass through the ground. The 3 of them had already entered the core of the forbidden orchard. If the golden demonic tree didn't interfere, they would be able to see the main body of the golden demonic tree as long as they went around the cracked area. There were still 2 minutes left. But he knew that the golden demonic tree would definitely try to stop them. Sure enough, before he could finish his thought, the solid ground under his feet let out a cracking sound. At such a close distance, the golden demonic tree's roots covered the ground, so they moved without warning. The Roman's ability couldn't be used at all. The 3 of them felt their bodies sinking. Brando, who was already prepared, stabbed his elven sword into the ground and supported Romain with one hand. He looked to the side and saw Freya half-squatting on the ground to stabilize her body. But before the 3 of them could breathe a sigh of relief, the ground sank again. This time, it was obvious that the rockworm had torn a hole in the ground. What is it trying to do? The ponytailed girl almost fell backwards and couldn't help but ask nervously. It wants to kill people. Be careful and run with me. Brando pulled the Roman up from the ground and pulled out his sword. He half-hugged Romain and leaped forward. They rolled twice on the ground to avoid the hole that the golden demonic tree had created with its roots. The Roman was protected by the young man's body. His face was as red as an apple and his eyes were wide open. He didn't even dare to breathe loudly. On the other side, Freya seemed like she wanted to jump over, but the golden demonic tree wasn't to be trifled with. It used its roots to pull the ground, causing her chest to hit the ground. If it wasn't for Brando quickly, she would have sunk into the ground with the soil and rocks. Thank you. Freya shook off his hand and bowed her head in reply. Now's not the time to talk about this. Brando pulled out his sword and cut a whip in half. But soon, more snake-shaped roots appeared in front of them, and the hole behind them was slanting downwards. It seemed that the boss was determined to teach them a lesson. But Brando was used to these tricks. He couldn't help but think that other than giving him a surprise in the first stage, this blockhead didn't seem to be able to do anything new. The ability to tear the ground apart was a large area of effect in the game, but it wasn't without weaknesses. "Watch carefully," he said to Freya while holding the Roman tightly. He stared at the roots that were sweeping towards them. Brando leaned to the side to let the whip pass in front of him. He reached out and grabbed it tightly. The golden demonic tree didn't expect this and hurriedly rolled up its roots in an attempt to throw Brando away. But the young man didn't let go. He hugged the Roman tightly and moved up and down. The boss of the Zavale mountain path finally lost its patience. It raised its roots and wanted to throw Brando to his death, but Brando took the opportunity to let go and jumped back. When he landed, he was already 34 meters away from the hole. His 3.7-ounce strength allowed him to have 4 times the strength of a normal person. His 2.9-ounce dexterity allowed him to be more agile than a mountain ape that could walk on the treetops as if they were flat ground. These attributes allowed him to complete this series of actions without any difficulty. When he landed, his strong muscles, bones, and organs absorbed the impact. If it was a normal person, their organs would have been shattered, but for him, it was only a slight discomfort. This was the benefit of increasing his body's attributes. Brando knew that everything he did before was not in vain. He had accumulated his attributes bit by bit for this moment. Brando immediately turned around and shouted to Freya, "Follow me." Then, without stopping, he grabbed the stumbling Romaine with one hand and rushed towards the golden demonic tree with one sword in hand. "Brando, wait. I can't keep up." But Brando didn't care about what she said. He turned the corner and the ground suddenly split open. A large number of roots shot out from the ground and formed a huge net. The golden demonic tree was behind this net. There was less than a minute left. Brando paused, and the Roman behind him also stopped and gasped for breath. She raised her head and looked curiously at the golden demonic tree. No matter how she thought about it, she felt that it must be the golden apple tree of the gods. Brando looked at the net. It was exactly the same as the one in the game. He drew a circle in front of him with the elven sword, and the 2 serpents that were sweeping towards him ignited and split into 4 parts. The military swordsmanship was wide open. There weren't many defensive moves, but there were a few that were very refined. Then he let go of the Roman and took a step back. He raised his sword with both hands and took a step forward. Power burst. Brando felt excessive power being drawn out from his upper arm, forearm, trapezius, and latissimus dorsi, causing the elven sword to draw a beautiful silver arc. The sword moved forward and hit the net with a strength of 7 ounces. This was the scene that Freya saw when she limped over from the back. She had always thought that she had seen his limit every time she saw him. Last time it was because he used a magic card to cheat, but this time she really saw that kind of power erupt. The tip of the sword squeezed the air to both sides, creating a rapid sonic boom. The net of roots of the golden demonic tree was torn open with a sizzling sound, and the entire net collapsed from the middle. The trapped beast of the Zavale mountain path could no longer stop the 3 of them, and could only watch as they broke through. Brando shouted to the Roman and Freya as soon as he entered the core area of the Forbidden Orchard, "You 2 go attack its roots, leave the main body to me." After that, he took out the card of fate and said in his heart, "Show me the holy sword." Even in summer, Winterclaw Castle was shrouded in a thin layer of frost. It was originally built in the high-altitude mountains of Corvado to monitor the barbarians in the forest from the north, but after the establishment of Balta province, it became one of the villas of the royal family. In the diamond-shaped courtyard of the castle, there was an ancient pine tree. It had miraculously survived a fire in Winterclaw Castle in the last century. The owner of the castle thought that it was a good omen, so he rebuilt the fortress and kept the tree. Now, under the pine tree, a solemn atmosphere was spreading. A little girl wearing a thick knight's uniform had beautiful silver hair, and her half-pointed ears proved that she had a part of the bloodline outside of humans. But unlike the elf's arrogance and gentleness, this 15-year-old girl had a solemn expression on her face. Both of her hands clenched onto a black longsword, and her posture was the defensive stance of Owen's cavalry swordsmanship. She pursed her lips and ordered a younger boy in front of her, "Haruz, attack me." Simple and unquestionable. "Sister, attack." The boy could only bite the bullet and thrust his sword at her. But the girl smoothly pressed down the tip of his sword, and then took a step forward and pressed her hand on his chest, directly pushing him to the ground. The servants around her gasped. "Again?" The girl's expression did not change as she said, "Sister, stand up again?" The little boy could only stand up and take a step back. He gritted his teeth and rushed forward again, but the girl in the knight's uniform changed the sword from her right hand to her left hand, and with a wave of her hand she actually knocked the boy's sword away. "Why are you distracted?" "Sorry." Again. 10 minutes later, the girl walked into the changing room and asked two maids to take off her heavy knight's uniform. Hot steam and sweat steamed her beautiful silver curly hair. She did not turn her head and asked, "Where is father?" "Madara's envoy has arrived, Your Highness. His Majesty is secretly meeting with Marquis Kluge." The other maid lowered her head and replied. The girl glanced at herself in the mirror, and her face was cold and expressionless. She changed into a dress, put her hands behind her long silver hair and threw it back. She raised her head and replied, "Take me to see Gemmer." She silently thought that there might be a turning point in the war, but Marquis Kluge, that cunning old man, was not worthy of her trust. Of course, there were some words that did not need to be said in front of the servants. She needed to find a trusted aide. "Yes, Your Highness." This day was the year of flowers and summer leaves, early June. Brando looked at the branches of the golden demonic tree that were gradually losing their color and weakly drooping down. He knew that this terrifying monster had finally reached the end of its life. He felt a little tired. Paying 2 points of MP to maintain the effects of the holy sword had almost drained all of his mental capacity. After all, he was a warrior, not a wizard. Even a magus at this level would only have around 10 points of magic power. Freya and Roman sat at the side, exhausted. Freya's arm was slightly injured, but it was not serious. Moreover, this injury was more exciting than defeating a powerful enemy. They could not help but turn back to look at Brando. But they saw Brando take a step forward, and the elven sword drew an arc and slashed at the trunk of the golden demonic tree. Power burst. The dying golden demonic tree that had lost the power of the blood of God was just an ordinary ancient oak tree. It was unable to resist the terrifying power of 7 ounces. The tearing power directly tore off half of its canopy, causing the canopy to break and fly away. The two girls gasped, not understanding what Brando was doing. But Brando knew that the golden demonic tree would hang the creatures it killed in the canopy and slowly drain them of their MP. After a long period of accumulation, there would still be some spoils of war. Although most of them had already been drained of their MP and turned into trash. Brando walked over, and the first thing he saw was the card on the ground. P.S. Currently, the clicks on the starting point only count as membership points. Please log in when you are reading this book. Thank you. It would be even better if you could give me your recommendations. Chapter 51. When the dust settled, the first thing he saw was a card that was about the size of a palm. He picked up the card. The front of the card was painted with a tree. It was tall and majestic, and mysterious veins extended from the trunk to the crown of the tree. On the top left of the card was a 7, but there was no elemental crystal symbol. He was stunned for a moment, but now that he knew how to deal with such things, he immediately opened the attribute data and scanned it. The description of the cards was changed to a different way. Sacred Tree Secret Land, Elven Forbidden Land 7. Basic Land, Forest, produces 1 water EP into the elemental pool every week. Tap. Construct the terrain of the forest. My soul returns to its homeland. This set of cards is called Elven Forbidden Land? Brando was stunned for a moment. The description of the card did not state the conditions for this card to work. Could it be that as long as it entered his deck, it would naturally produce 1 water EP every week? But what if he did not have the elemental pool? And tapping this card to construct a forest was also debatable. Of course, he would definitely not experiment here. Although once the golden demonic tree fell, its magic servants would scatter like birds and beasts, and would quickly wither due to the loss of magic supply. Perhaps one of the demonic trees could take root in another forest and continue the ecosystem, but that had nothing to do with Brando. Brando was worried that after the stone worm absorbed the scattered earth EP and magic, it would come to trouble the three of them. Elemental creatures did not have enough to eat. He put the card away and remembered the magic resonance from before. There must be another card that belonged to the night deck here. Unfortunately, the magic resonance was natural and could not be triggered repeatedly. Otherwise, he could use this method to search for it. Brando asked Freya and Roman to collect some acorns from the golden demonic tree. The ripe acorns could be used to make high-grade magic potions, which were also the most luxurious consumables in the game. Unfortunately, a golden demonic tree could only produce 7 or 8 ripe acorns at most. It was impossible to do it once and for all. He walked to a place, flipped the leaves and found a pair of gloves wrapped around the aerial root. He could tell that it was a protective glove just by looking at the style of the glove. The protective glove provided 2 points of defense in the game, but it had a strength requirement. Brando vaguely remembered that it was 2.5 energy rank, and when he touched it he felt that it was quite heavy, so he was sure that he had guessed correctly. He tossed the glove to Freya to test it out, hoping that the latter would be more of a meat shield. Unfortunately, the ponytail girl's hands sank as soon as she caught the glove. It was too heavy. The future Valkyrie had no choice but to return it with a look of pity. What a pity! Brando shook his head. With this and the Wind Empress half-body armor, swordsmen below iron rank will not be able to hurt you. I'm sorry. What's there to be sorry about? I think only a few of the guards can wear them, Brando said as he put on the gloves. The ponytail girl noticed this detail and couldn't help but feel a little surprised. Does this mean that Brando is already one of the best in the guards? Of course, she didn't know that even Bennett was no match for Brando at this moment. The three of them searched the fallen tree in a clockwise manner. The Roman found a nimble dagger with +0.1 energy rank, while Freya found a priceless 22-ounce enchanted ring. She only needed to use a little mana to activate it and she would be able to add a layer of flames to her dagger. As for the rest, most of them were waste products that had already lost their magic. Brando used the elven sword to peel off the skin of the golden demonic tree and found the heart of the golden tree. To his disappointment, the heart of the oak tree was still in the form of a tree crystal due to the difference of 3 years in the game. Of course, it was much purer than the average tree crystal. But materials were materials and equipment was equipment. There was an uncrossable gap between them. This unexpected discovery made Brando alert. He couldn't use the perspective of many years in the game to look at things in the present. After all, this was a real world and history was moving forward slowly. When Brando took out the heart of the golden tree, he felt as if a breeze was blowing through the valley. The golden demonic tree was dead. He raised his head and saw 8 silver balls of light flying out from the trunk and into his chest. 800 EXP. Brando couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment. 800 EXP wasn't a lot, but it was still a huge blow to him. After all, EXP in this world was real, and it was a power that could make him stronger. Thus, compared to the game, he was more excited every time he gained EXP. He could clearly feel that he was growing bit by bit from battle after battle. While Brando was immersed in his own thoughts, he saw Romaine running over as if she was presenting a treasure. She carefully held an item in her hands and showed it to him. The equipment they found before were all appraised by Brando. The young man could tell what it was, where it came from, how to activate it, and whether it had any magic. At this time, Brando had become a synonym for omnipotence in the Roman's heart. Brando, you're looking for this, right? She held the card and asked carefully. Brando looked at the card in her hands. The pattern of the card was gray, and there was a drawing of a tall knight and his robed squire. The color of the card was the same as the background of his holy sword card. Brendel immediately realized that this was the card he was looking for. He took a look at it and it was as expected. Highland Squire, Knight 9, Water Elemental 1, Creature, Human Scholar, Level 8 Creature. When Highland Squire enters the field, 1 prestige per week. Maintenance cost. For every day this card is in the field, 1 Water Elemental will be paid. Highland's Courage. This was a summoning card. Even if Brando was slow, he could guess it at this moment. This Highland Squire was a scholar, and the description of the card was Highland's Courage. It must be referring to the apprentice squire of the Karsuk Highlands. The wizards of Karsuk and the knight had been allies for 2 centuries. A level 8 scholar was not strong. However, if used well at a critical moment, it would be a great help. He could not help but look at the Roman who was looking at him expectantly. He smiled and said, "Thank you. This is very useful to me." "You're welcome," Romaine said happily. But at this time, Freya ran back from the north and said with a worried face, "Brando, Roman, I think I saw a rockworm coming from the north. Should we avoid it?" Rockworm? Brando was stunned. He wanted to let everyone rest, but he did not expect the rockworm to come so quickly. Although the rockworm might not attack them, most people would choose the safer way in this situation. He nodded and said, "You guys go first. I'll make some arrangements to prevent that thing from catching up." The rockworm used magic to smell and vibrate to determine the location of its prey. Therefore, using magic items to attract its attention could be used. Brendel waited for Romain and Freya to leave before he took out the bottle of number 5 holy water. He used the Thorn of Light to open a hole at the bottom and placed it in a crack between the rocks. He looked around to make sure he did not miss anything before he retreated to the west alone. He thought that because of the previous magic resonance, Madara might send a small team to investigate the situation here. But by then the rockworm would teach those skeletons an unforgettable lesson. It could be considered as revenge for Breton's group. It was June of the year of summer leaves and flowers. History was progressing according to Brando's expectations. Madara's secret envoy arrived at Winterclaw Fort. King Erwin Oberg VI accepted Marquis Kluge's suggestion and refused to meet the envoy. Therefore the First War of the Black Rose quickly entered its second phase. On the battlefield, Karsuk province was facing Madara's Winter's Solstice and Black Raven legions. Duke Ajin even sent a messenger to cry that if they did not receive reinforcements in a short period of time, their morale would collapse. At the same time, further north, between the Kelman Mountains and the sea, an undead army was secretly advancing. In the southern Grimoires province, Insursta's army was attacking Fort Vermeer day after day. On the other hand, the Buchi region fell into an eerie silence. The commander, Count Pulla, had sent a letter to the 104th Swordsman Regiment stationed at Fort Reedon. Everything is fine. It was June 1st. At this time, Brando, Freya and the rest were passing through the secret passage under the Forbidden Orchard. They were rushing towards Fort Reedon as fast as they could. In fact, they had already discovered traces of undead activity along the way, but the scale was very small. It seemed more like undead scouts were approaching Fort Reedon. This made the atmosphere in the group tense. They were one step ahead of Madara's main force, but no one knew how big this step was. At midnight, Brando brought Freya and the Roman through the last section of the Zavale mountain path. By the time they reached a small hill called Findick Hill, south of Fort Reedon, the wind of the night brought them into the Pine Valley, which stretched as far as the eye could see. It was the confluence of the Pine River and the Wesley River. The lights of Fort Reedon were like a shining jewel embedded in the darkness, quietly lying in the valley a few miles away, lighting up the entire riverbank. Seeing this scene, Freya and Romain held their breaths. They had always wondered what kind of place Fort Reedon was, but they didn't expect that a spark in the darkness could be so beautiful. At this time, Romain poked Brando's back and whispered, "Brando, there's an army behind us." "An army?" "Yes, look north from here. We passed by that valley in the afternoon. Can you see it?" "That's more than 10 miles away. How can I see it clearly in such darkness?" "My lady, don't joke with me at this time." Brando was stunned and said in a bad mood, "But I can see it." Chapter 52. Brando, Roman might be telling the truth. Freya reminded him. Brando knew that Roman might be telling the truth. He had seen her sharp senses before. But he thought to himself, I'm just joking to lighten the mood. If the future goddess of war is always so serious, you will grow old quickly. He couldn't help but look back at Roman. Romain also looked back at him. To be honest, her curious gaze was sometimes a little embarrassing, especially for someone with a guilty conscience. But Brando liked this girl from the bottom of his heart. She was different in his eyes and he thought that she was surprisingly cute. He thought for a moment and replied, "Let's stop here for a while." "Stop for a while?" Freya asked, "But Madara's army is right behind us. They will arrive after us in 2 or 3 hours. We don't have much time left, Brando." But Brando took out the seal ring from his pocket and waved it in front of them. He replied, "It's the middle of the night and the city will be under martial law. This alone doesn't mean anything. If we are treated as spies from Madara, then it's all over." "Then what should we do?" Freya thought that her efforts would at least be of some use. Brando looked at her. He knew that he was talking nonsense. What if Fortress Reedon didn't discover Madara's invasion? Not necessarily. The nobles wouldn't neglect their own safety. They would just rather hide in the city and wait for reinforcements. He remembered that in the year of the cave beasts, 342, the blood staff swept through the eastern part of Karsuk, and the undead army left nothing behind. The city lord of Silver Horse ordered the city gates to be closed, and ignored the requests for help from the eastern part of the city. This led to a large number of poor peasants migrating to the west, and that area was still barren and uninhabited to this day. But even so, the nobles weren't reprimanded in the slightest. In other words, the royal family was already powerless to criticize the nobles before Oberg VII ascended to the throne. This happened in the Karsuk province in the north of the Grimoires region. The Roman and Freya did not know much about it, but Brando was very clear about it. He didn't want to say that his plan was to help the Romans save his aunt. Of course, if he had the chance he would try his best to save as many people as possible. But as for reporting to Fortress Reden, he didn't even think of himself as a savior. Brando never thought of himself as a savior. It was better to expect pigs to fly than to expect the nobles to understand human language. In the old Erewhon era, the players in the game had clashed with the arrogant nobles more than once. Even during the December coup, some players had directly participated. Brando never had a good impression of these guys. But when he thought about it again, Freya might not have the same opinion as him. He couldn't help but look at her again. This country girl who held her sword and stared blankly at Fortress Reden still trusted this country. There was nothing wrong with that, but he was worried that she might act rashly at a crucial moment. But even if he told the truth, Freya might not believe him, and it would only cause conflict between the two of them. Brando didn't want to argue. He thought for a while and suddenly had an idea. Of course, the necessary preparations still needed to be made. He pretended to think for a while and replied, "I thought about it, it seems like we don't have much choice. After all, we are Erewhon's people and we can't completely avoid the risks. But," he paused for a while, "we still need to be fully prepared." Roman and Freya could only agree with Brando's righteous words. Even the heroic ponytail girl couldn't help but soften her attitude. She looked at Brando with a gentle gaze, and suddenly felt that this guy wasn't as shameless as she thought. But only a genius would know that Brando was secretly relieved after he finished speaking. He was surprised to find that he seemed to have found a balance between Brando and himself. He was never a person who stuck to the rules, but recently, it felt like there was a large hand pushing him forward mechanically, making him a little breathless. But as his strength gradually grew, and his soul was baptized in the dream of the golden demonic tree, the feeling of the past finally returned to him. This made him feel that he was able to deal with the problem easily again. His way of thinking even included some of Brando's quickness. This feeling was great. He took out the ebony gargoyle statue which still had a small crack on it. He turned his head and said, "You also need to be prepared. Freya, turn your ring around, the fire agate in the middle is too conspicuous. Little Roman, you need to keep the dagger close to your body, those lazy guards won't search too carefully." "Do I have to turn my ring around too?" "No need, no one will look at that broken ring of yours. Brando, those people are the city's guards. Why does it seem like you don't trust them?" Freya couldn't help but ask. "It's not that I don't trust them, but I never trusted them. You'll know when the time comes, just do as I say for now." Freya had never entered the city, but she more or less felt that he was making a mountain out of a molehill. But at this moment, Brando was the authority, so she could only choose to believe. As Brando spoke, he took out bits and pieces from his body. The main thing was that he didn't have time to identify some of the small items found on the noble's body. He found that the pipe was just an ordinary item, so he threw it away. As for the dark gray stone piece, he didn't even recognize it. This was actually not strange, as there were thousands of production materials, so it was normal that Brando didn't recognize one of the minerals. The last glass bead was a little interesting. Brando found that it was actually a container after a piece of soul crystal was consumed. In layman's terms, it was a storage item. The spell inside should be 10 feet of silence, which was a very suitable spell to avoid the nest of some monsters when adventuring in the wild. But what made Brando embarrassed was that as a warrior, he didn't have the ability to activate storage items. He hesitated for a moment before keeping these things and the cards with him, so as to prevent those greedy guards from touching them. He looked up at the sky and it was still early. The three of them came down from the east side of Mount Findeck, and along the way they began to see scattered buildings. They were mainly farmsteads and isolated houses of mercenaries in the wilderness at night. The farmsteads were scattered on both sides of the Pine River. There were also a few goose houses in the wilderness. These goose houses were only patronized by passing adventurers and those who were engaged in illicit business. Of course, apart from the players, most of the adventurers weren't clean themselves. Moreover, most of the NPCs treated the players as grave robbers. They walked in the wilderness for about an hour, and the towering walls of Fortress Reden suddenly appeared in front of them in the night sky. There were braziers on the suspension bridge under the tower, and the light from the flames could be seen tens of meters away. Brando had Freya and Roman slow down, and then slowly walked out of the darkness at the edge of the flames. The guards on the tower were talking to each other, and there was even a faint snoring sound. Brando was very sensitive to these sounds and he frowned, guessing that there were about 7 to 8 people on the tower. When the three of them appeared, the chatter stopped. "Who are you people?" They remained alert for a short while, and then a soldier with a pointed helmet popped his head out from the tower and shouted. Roman looked up and squinted his eyes, and saw that there was a black pine symbol on the helmet. Brando said that the black pine symbol meant that they were from the local army. The white mane soldiers should have a wolf feather symbol as expected. Brando knew everything, she thought. One man, two women. We came from the forest, master, and we saw something strange. My wife and I were frightened, and wanted to go into the city to hide. Brando raised his hand and shouted. Freya was embarrassed and angry at the same time. One man and two women, how vulgar. When she heard Brando say that they were his wives, she couldn't help but secretly poke Brando's back with her sword sheath. This bastard must have done it on purpose, she thought. Roman didn't mind. She probably thought that being Brando's wife wasn't bad, and Brando would protect her anyway, right? Brando couldn't say anything, and he could only say that to make the guards lower their guard. As for the explanation, Freya and Roman looked different, and they couldn't say that they were siblings and the guards weren't idiots. Did you bring any weapons? The guard asked again. Freya nervously held her sword when she heard that. But Brando didn't panic and raised his voice. How would we dare to walk in the forest without weapons, and I used to be a militia master. The tower became quiet, and only a long snoring sound could be heard. After a while, a basket was put down and the guard shouted, Put your weapons in the basket. Then we will bring you up one by one. Brando nodded to Freya and let them do as they were told. Although his thorn of light was exquisite, no one could tell that it was a magic sword as long as he didn't chant it. After all, elven swords were still passed down in the human world. After the weapons were handed over, the guard sent down a basket for them to go up one by one. Brando was afraid that Roman and Freya would be at a disadvantage, so he took the initiative to go up first. Freya was the second to let Roman go first, and she was the last to be pulled up. But when she sat in the basket and was pulled up to the tower, she saw Brando and Roman in a state of swords, and two guards were walking towards her with their swords drawn. What's going on? Freya was stunned and asked in surprise. She subconsciously looked at Brando, but she didn't expect him to look away and not answer her question. The ponytailed girl panicked. She always treated Brando as the backbone of the team, but now it seemed like the decision was in her hands. What should she do? Should she let these people hold her hostage? Are these people doing things according to the norm? Brando, hurry up and answer me. What are you thinking, damn it? Capture them all. These people are Madara's scouts. But at this time, Freya suddenly heard someone in the corner give an order. She was shocked and turned around to ask, You know that Madara's army is invading? Brando's face was terrible, although Freya had grown up. She was still a little girl who hadn't seen the world, and a few words were enough to make her panic. She might have thought that there was nothing wrong with what she said, but she didn't know that the guards of Fortress Reden were most afraid of encountering people from Wuxia. These people wanted to suppress the news in the city, so that they could shirk their responsibilities in the future. Brando knew very well that they thought that with Fortress Reden's high walls, they could sit back and relax, but they didn't know that the war was going in an unpredictable direction. Wait a minute, we're not scouts. Freya couldn't help but defend herself. We're Wuxia's militia, we have Wuxia's guard badge. But the voice didn't care about her and shouted, Capture her, what are you hesitating for? The person who spoke walked out from the darkness. He was wearing a black chainmail, and the feathers on his helmet showed that he was the leader of this group. But this wretched middle-aged man was looking at Freya with a perverted gaze, thinking that he had picked up a good one this time. Of course he believed that Freya was telling the truth, the militia badge was still on her. But he didn't think that a poor village like Wuxia would have such an outstanding woman. He rubbed his chin. P.S. Please count votes, please support me. Chapter 53. Seeing how flustered Freya was, Brando guessed that she probably had some understanding of the Fortress Reden's troops. But it was not enough, he wanted her to know more. Only reality could let Freya understand the situation they were in. Of course, Brando did not want to destroy her last bit of hope in this country, but sometimes, doing things could not be done with passion. Rushing around recklessly would only lead to injuries. Brando was never a rash person, and he hoped that Freya would learn to act calmly. Of course he would protect them when necessary, but the bottom line was that he could not let these people hurt Freya and the Roman. He wanted to see how Freya was going to deal with this crisis, but he saw her gaze in the distance. He was startled and followed her gaze. He realized that she was looking at the east side of Fortress Reden's barracks. He saw a group of people with different heights surrounding a tall middle-aged man. Behind them was a group of white main light infantry. They seemed to be nobles. Brando suddenly felt that it was interesting. He did not expect his luck to be so good. It was as if someone had sent him a pillow when he wanted to sleep. But Freya's reaction was quick, and she immediately noticed those important figures. He roughly understood Freya's thoughts and nodded his head to himself. From a normal person's point of view, Freya's reaction was correct. Of course, Brando only wanted to see how she was going to break her head and bleed. If he said that, it would be unfair to the future goddess of war, but Brando knew that he was doing it for her sake and that was enough. Furthermore, this was Freya's own choice. He turned around and saw two guards drawing their swords towards Freya. They did not expect that the girl would dare to resist when their two companions had already surrendered. She was also so decisive. The moment she jumped into the tower, she rushed towards the weapons rack. The two guards were shocked and quickly drew their swords to block her. But Freya suddenly turned around and grabbed one of the guard's wrist with her right hand. She leaned to the side and used her left hand to chop the guard's armpit. From snatching the sword to subduing the guard, the entire process was done in a single breath. In the blink of an eye, the guard screamed and fell to the ground. The ponytailed girl snatched the sword and clashed with the other guard. With 3 consecutive slashes, she relied on the strength she had gained from the battle with the golden demonic tree to force the guard to retreat 5 steps until he reached the wall. Then, she turned her sword around and knocked the unlucky guard on the head, causing him to bleed and fall to the ground. Then she turned around, and the aura on her body actually scared the remaining 4 guards and their captain into taking a step back. Freya could not help but feel bitter. The Fortress Reden's army that she had always relied on was only at this level. She thought that all of them were as strong as Brendel or maybe a little weaker, but at least they should not be too far off. But Brendel secretly praised her for her beauty. The local guards were only at the level of veterans, but Freya's skills were already enough to enter the guards. She was also calm and collected, which was even more commendable. But when he looked at the white main light infantry, he thought that if Freya thought that the kingdom's army was also this strong, she would be in for a big loss. But what he needed to do now was not to delay the future goddess of war's judgment. So he suddenly grabbed the 2 guards beside him and threw them out before they could react. Then he turned around and grabbed his elven sword. With a swing of his sword, the 2 guards who were holding onto the Roman lost their swords. What do you plan to do? He did not care about the guards who were lying on the ground and grabbed the Roman's hand and ran over. Freya glared at him and then looked towards the camp. Her meaning was clear. Go over there? That's good too. As the saying goes, the king of hell is easy to deal with, but the little demons are hard to deal with. Brando laughed. What does that mean? The Roman asked curiously. She rubbed her wrist. Those people had used too much strength just now, so much so that her hands were sore from grabbing. What I mean is, let's see what those big shots have to say. Freya felt that there was more to this guy's words, but she did not have time to refute him. She looked at the guard captain who was paralyzed on the ground with disgust, and then she took the lead and jumped out of the tower. Brando, Freya seems to be angry. It's okay, just follow me. Romain looked at him curiously. The Golden Apple Lord, Esabar, was in a good mood today if it wasn't for the scene in front of him. When he saw this young girl suddenly rushing in front of him, he was startled for a moment. The guards behind him swarmed forward and surrounded her. Esabar also saw that there were 2 people in the encirclement, and they were dressed like country bumpkins. He was stunned for a moment, and then anger rose in his chest. What are these bastards doing? How could they let 3 dirty country bumpkins barge in here? Who is the guard captain tonight? I'm going to make him go back and eat himself. Esabar's face turned green and white, and he was about to explode. But he felt someone poke him with a cane from behind. He looked back and saw the disgusting industrialist, the owner of the workshop, Sir Burnley's ugly face. To be honest, he did not want to say anything more to this calculative fatty who reeked of money. Fortunately, the Lord's mind was clear enough to understand that at least they were on the same side. He followed his gaze and was shocked when he saw Freya's epaulette. Butchie's militia, didn't they say that Madara's army had reached the Belder Forest? How did they get here? He could not help but glance at a place a little further behind, hoping that the important people there did not notice the commotion here. Then he held his sword and shouted at the guards, "What are you doing here? Take the assassins away." Assassins? Freya was about to speak, but she was shocked by the words. She opened her eyes wide and wanted to argue, but she realized that the guards around her had drawn their swords. The clear sound of metal vibrating was as if it was going to pierce her heart. What's going on here? It was at this moment that a quiet and solemn voice interrupted. causing everyone to subconsciously move aside. After the crowd separated, a middle-aged man with deep-set eyes, a high-nose bridge and a gloomy face appeared. He held a golden cane and looked at everyone with a cold gaze. Escobar took a deep breath and cursed in his heart. Damn it, he still attracted this trouble. His mind raced, but his expression remained unchanged as he replied, "A few civilians broke in. They might be assassins." "Civilians?" The middle-aged man frowned. "Sir, we are not assassins. We are Butchie's militia," Freya hurriedly explained. "We are here to report that Butchie is under Ma." The middle-aged man showed a disgusted expression and interrupted, "What's your name?" "Fu Freya." Freya was stunned. She felt that the man's cold gaze was like being stared at by a poisonous snake, and she could not help but lower her head. "What about you?" he asked the Roman on the other side. "My name is Roman, uncle." The future merchant girl blinked and replied. Some people in the crowd could not help but laugh, but they quickly held it back. This time, the middle-aged man's expression did not change and he waved his hand. "Take them away, we will talk after we interrogate them." "Sir, we..." Freya was shocked and quickly raised her head to explain. But the middle-aged man did not listen to their explanation, and instead ordered the guards to surround the three of them. The middle-aged man looked at them coldly and said, "Wait." As if his words had a great effect, everyone subconsciously stopped what they were doing and looked at him. "Let me see the sword in that person's hand." He pointed at Brando with his cane. "Sword?" Everyone was stunned, and then they noticed the shape of the sword in Brando's hand. It was an elven sword. Elven swords were known for their beauty, and were usually circulated in the upper circle as works of art. Escobar could not help but curse again, thinking that this ruthless man had sharp eyes. He had set his eyes on the two women and the sword. What made him uncomfortable was that the other party's identity and position were much higher than his. Even if he said that he wanted it, he could only obediently give it to him. He could not afford to offend the power behind the other party. He waved his hand, and the guards immediately understood and pointed their swords at Brando. Brando turned around to look at Freya, and saw that the girl's face was blank and lost. He knew that it was about time, but he still had to remain calm. He shrugged and obediently handed over the sword. At least this kid knows what's good for him. This action made Escobar think to himself. A guard jogged over with the sword and handed it over to the middle-aged man with both hands. The middle-aged man coldly picked up the sword, flipped it over and read the words on it. Sanston Donamaru, Elven, the sword is born from the light and all enemies tremble in fear. He raised the sword and the elven sword in his hand shone brightly. Everyone around could not help but gasp. A magic sword. These nobles could not help but look at Brando and the others, and they were even more convinced that the three of them were assassins. After all, which militia would carry a magic weapon with them? No one would believe it. However, the middle-aged man looked at the glowing leaf-shaped sword in his hand, and for the first time, a smile appeared on his face. He looked at the industrialist beside him and asked, "Sir Barian is rich and knowledgeable. Can you tell me the origin of this sword?" "I've seen a few elven weapons, but how could I compare to what you've seen in that circle, my lord?" The nobleman with the ball of mutton fat hurriedly rolled his body and said fawningly. The middle-aged man smiled coldly and replied, "Then for the sake of this sword, I'll let them have an easy time tonight. Tomorrow I'll personally interrogate these assassins. As for the two ladies, take good care of them. You better tell your captain grandson exactly what I said. Don't think that I don't know about their dirty." His words became colder and finally, the guard in front of him kept quiet out of fear. However, the others revealed a meaningful smile. The more obvious this man's attitude was, the more advantageous it was for them. It was just two ladies and a sword. Compared to their own interests, they were more concerned about the latter. Freya's face was flushed with anger, and she could not help but take a deep breath. She gritted her teeth and clenched her fists. For a moment, Brando was afraid that she would act rashly without considering the consequences. Fortunately, the Valkyrie was much calmer than when he first met her. He raised his head and looked at the middle-aged man, and then looked at the shining thorn of light in his hand. He frowned. Who was this man? He seemed to have a high status. It was a pity that he did not know every detail of history, but his reaction was interesting. However, he was not too nervous. The best part was yet to come. When they were taken away by the guards, Brando clearly heard the middle-aged man ask, "All right, back to the main topic. Mr. Escobar, when do you plan to let me out of the city?" The middle-aged man's voice was cold and filled with a hint of sarcasm. "Count Escobar, it's a critical time now. Madara has already entered Fort Vermeer. Butchie's flanks might be affected at any time. The wilderness is too dangerous, especially since you're a close subject of His Majesty. What reason do we have to let you take the risk? The middle-aged man smiled and did not continue the conversation. P.S. 3 Rivers on Amber, there's a poll. I hope everyone will vote for it. Also, for those who have free votes, please vote for the work, Amber. The author does not need to vote. Chapter 54. After the guard captain sent them here, he coldly threatened them and left, making Freya grit her teeth in anger. This should be the second level of the dungeon. There are 32 cells here and there are 4 wardens. They are all light infantry from the 104th Swordsman Regiment of the White Main Army. Brendel thought to himself as he sat alone in the darkness. This should be the second level of the dungeon. There are 32 cells here and there are 4 wardens. They are all light infantry from the 104th Swordsman Regiment. In the past, who didn't have a PK Red name in the game? This wasn't the first time he visited Fortress Rieden's prison, but they were all locked up in the 3rd floor. In the eyes of the NPCs, the players were a bunch of lawless people. Thinking about this, Brando couldn't help but laugh. He took out the ebony gargoyle statue and touched it. The crack on it was almost undetectable. Then he turned around and asked in the dark, "Freya, Roman, how are you? Are you okay?" "Brando, how long will we be locked up?" Romaine's voice sounded uneasy. Brando thought to himself, so you also have times when you're afraid. The 2 girls were locked up in the opposite cell. Although it was dark, at least they were safe. Just as he wanted to say something to comfort her, he heard a bang from the darkness. Damn it. Those despicable bastards, all our hard work is not for these people. Freya slammed her fist on the wooden fence, gritting her teeth in anger. You inside, what are you doing? Do you want to be whipped? The jailer's fierce voice sounded from outside. Even though Freya was so angry that she wanted to rush out and beat up every single one of them, but she understood the situation she was in. She took a deep breath and calmed herself down. Brando, what do we do? She asked softly. Another voice immediately interrupted. This is the dark prison, right? Andy said that some people are locked up their whole lives and never see the light of day. Brando, will we be the same? Shut your crow's beak, Romaine. Freya replied in Brendel's place, annoyed. He smiled. Do you still have hope for those people? I hope they all die. Freya gritted her teeth. But without their help, Fortress Rieden will be in danger. Brando walked to the door and replied softly. Freya was silent. At least I tried my best. She replied, my power is not limitless, I can only do this much for Butchie. Brando felt relieved. It seems that the night was worth it. In fact, he noticed that after the dream at the Golden Tree, Freya quickly. It was because of this that his Valkyrie training plan could be carried out, and he wanted Freya to be his assistant. An S-rank general in the game. This was a deal that would never be a loss. It's good that you think that way. He replied. Brando, do you have any ideas? Yes, you guys step back. Since Brando dared to come in, he must have a way to get out. The reason why he was so fearless was because he knew that the next night was going to be a nightmare. The funny thing was that the nobles of Fortress Rieden didn't know about it. Freya had given these people a final chance, but they had locked her up here with a groundless accusation. Was this what they meant by seeking their own destruction? Wait, Brando W, what are you doing? Don't do anything rash, this is the prison. Although Freya said that she wanted the nobles to die, she still thought of herself as Erwin's people. If she went out like that, wouldn't it be a rebellion? I know what I'm doing. What do you mean what you're doing? Roman talked to him. Freya couldn't help but lower her voice. On one hand, she hoped that the guards outside would come in and stop Brando's crazy actions, but on the other hand, she was worried that the people outside would notice what was going on inside. Brando, I want to go out too. Romaine replied. Shut up, I didn't ask you to persuade me like that. Freya wanted to cry. Did these 2 people not understand the situation they were in? Breaking out of the prison would result in a death sentence. When she thought that her 2 best companions might become wanted criminals, she couldn't help but feel a little helpless. Brando took out the Highland Squire card and threw it on the ground. The water EP that the Sacred Tree Secret Ground produced this week was immediately paid out. After a cloud of smoke, a young man wearing a long robe and carrying a large bundle of scrolls walked out. Brando already knew that before there was an elemental pool. The EP produced by the card would be paid out that week and would be lost. In other words, it couldn't be saved, but it could still be used within this week. My name is the Shire Lord. I'm happy to serve you. The young man looked at him and bowed deeply. You're a Highland mage? Brando asked. Apprentice. The young man added seriously. Brando found that he could inspect the other party's attributes. Highland Wizard Apprentice with 16 HP, 8 MP and 2 spells. Basic Composition, 2 MP, and Magic Arrow, 1 MP. Knowledge System, Basic Magic, Composition Magic, Basic Knowledge, Local and Geographical Knowledge and Level 1 Heraldry. You learn Law Magic? That's right. A Law Wizard was a type of wizard in a broad sense, dedicated to researching the power of the law. Their magic was a type of magic that manipulated the threads connecting the material world and the law world, using the energy of the gems to transform and materialize their power. There were 9 schools of wizards in the Amber Sword: Law Magic, Elemental Magic, String Magic, Witchcraft, Runic Magic, Holy Words, Astrology, Psychic Magic and Magic Circle. In fact, each of these 9 schools represented a different set of magic systems, but ordinary people often couldn't tell the difference between them, so they were collectively called wizards. But this saying was not without reason because after all, magic had one thing in common, and that was mystery. Brando, who's talking to you? Freya suddenly stopped and asked. Yes, my attendant. Brando replied. Attendant? The girl was stunned. Brando took out the soul crystal that contained the 10 feet silence spell and threw it to the young man. Activate it. Although warriors couldn't use storage items, wizard apprentices could. The Shire took the crystal bead and injected 1 MP into it. The surface of the soul crystal glowed faintly, and the surroundings became silent. It was as if an invisible monster suddenly appeared in the darkness and swallowed all sound. Freya was also shocked. She suddenly found that she couldn't make a sound. Of course, she didn't know that this was Brando's masterpiece, and for a moment her heart was pounding. After all, most ordinary people would react this way when faced with a mysterious spell. The Shire nodded to his lord. Brando turned around and took the opportunity to punch the thick wooden bars of the dungeon. After the battle with the golden demonic tree, Brando's hands were unprecedentedly rich. 965 EXP was enough for him to level up the mercenaries to level 8, and the militia to level 6. After leveling up to level 15, his strength had reached 4 ounces. And after the power burst, it exceeded 10 ounces. When he punched the wooden bars, the sturdy pillars should have broken from the middle, and then suddenly flew out and hit the bars on Freya's side with a loud bang. But within the range of the silence spell, one could only see the wood silently shattering, wood chips flying everywhere. 2 pieces of wood flew over and hit the other side, quietly bouncing off and bouncing twice when they fell. Brando walked out of the gap that was about the width of a person, and then the Shire. He grabbed the iron chain on the opposite side of the bars, and with a casual tug, it deformed and then broke into pieces. He opened the door again, and the duration of the silence spell had just ended. What, do you want to stay a little longer? Brando stood at the door of the cell, looking at the 2 surprised girls and asked with a smile. You came out just like that? Freya couldn't believe what she had just seen. This was too lawless. Looking at Brando's skillful movements, it seemed like this wasn't the first time he had done something like this. Brando laughed. Those nobles really treated him like a nameless militia. What a joke. In the game he had escaped from prison at least 80 if not 100 times. Not to mention a small place like Fortress Reedon, even the port city of Ampere Seal's Ironthorn stronghold had a successful escape. Players had always ignored the rules of NPCs, and in the past, there was a strong player who escaped from the capital prison of Gruus, and it caused a sensation on the forums. He thought that if he stayed here until tomorrow morning, wouldn't he be letting down his former identity as a player? And who is he? Freya only just noticed that there was another person beside Brando. Respected ladies, I am the Lord's Squire. The Shire lowered his head and bowed to the 2 girls. Squire? Lord? Roman and Freya almost couldn't control their voices. What was going on? Could it be that the dungeon is some kind of mysterious space? Why did he suddenly become a lord after staying there for a while and even have a follower? Freya couldn't help but pat her face to make sure she wasn't dreaming. She couldn't help but think that if the young man who lived alone in the old mansion and disappeared for a few months was a lord, then wouldn't she be a goddess of war? Moreover, how did you come here? She couldn't help but ask. As you can see, I am a mage. The Shire replied calmly. This made Brando praise him. This guy's ability to bullshit was almost on par with his own. A wizard's apprentice. Freya sucked in a cold breath. You are a Highland knight, Brando, so you are a Danian. She looked at Brando in disbelief. In this world, there was only one kind of mage that would appear as a squire of a knight. The Highland Knights of Karsuk had allied with the wizards for 300 years, forming the strongest military force in Erewhon, the White Knight Regiment. The Highland Knights and their mage squires were already well-known legends in Erewhon. At this moment, Freya had already determined that Brando was a noble young man born in a Highland Knight family. No wonder he is so powerful, no wonder he can be so calm, so he is a knight. She suddenly lowered her head, thinking that this hateful guy was obviously a noble, but why did he approach her and Roman? They were just two small commoners. Yes, he must be up to no good. She immediately put the blame on Brando for some of the bad habits of nobles that she heard from Aunt Sil, and then quietly shrank back. Brando obviously did not expect their future goddess of war to be so good at thinking. He thought she was too shocked to accept the fact. Actually, he had no choice since they thought it was easier to accept, and it also saved him the trouble of explaining. He could not help but shake his head and look at the Shire. Reality was so helpless. Very well, ladies. It's almost time, come out quickly. Brando looked at the Roman hiding in the dark, looking at him with bright eyes full of curiosity. He could not help but shake his head and said, "You don't really plan to stay in there until dawn, do you?" "Brando, are you really a knight?" the Roman suddenly asked. "No, I am Brando," he replied. "Then I will come out. Please, P.S. I will explode, don't worry, please vote." Chapter 55. When the three of them came out of the cell, they saw Brando easily taking care of the three patrolling guards. The whole process was done silently and skillfully. Freya suspected that Brando had undergone special training in the past, but why would a Highland Knight need such training? The dungeon under the barracks did not have many prisoners, and the security was very lax. Fortress Reedon had a dungeon that was used to lock up criminals, but the dungeon here was mainly used to lock up deserters and robbers. However, the military would usually execute these people on the spot, so the dungeon had not been used many times since it was built, and the wardens were only there to deal with it. However, the dungeon in the game was used to lock up players, and it was completely different from the dungeon here. It was overcrowded. If the White Mane Army had any other enemies in the game other than Madara, it would definitely be this dungeon. After taking care of the patrolling guards, the four of them went to the center of the dungeon. The guard who was in charge of the keys was shocked when he saw the four of them coming out from the darkness, and subconsciously pulled out his sword from the wall. However, Brando immediately raised his protective gloves and blocked the guard's sword with a layer of blue light. The blue light was about the size of a soccer ball, and there seemed to be a force pushing the sharp sword away. The White Mane Light Infantry was shocked, and the sword in his hand was taken away by Brando. Then the young man pushed him away, causing him to hit the wall, and he fainted with a groan. But to Brendel they were just ordinary soldiers. He had the ability to kill them, but he did not kill them. He only knocked them out with one move. Freya saw that he had defeated the last enemy and could not help but say, "You are so powerful, Brando. If it wasn't for this trip, I would still be at the bottom of a well. You are not bad, don't belittle yourself. White Swordsman is at the middle of the pack, you are more than qualified to enter the garrison." Brando found the key to the next floor from the guard and replied, "Swordsman by?" The Shire explained, "For a swordsman, iron, silver and gold ranks correspond to the titles of a knight squire, official knight and superior knight. As for an iron swordsman, Erewhon calls them knights reserve. If a nobleman has the slightest potential, he or she will be sent to a great noble family to become a squire. According to tradition, a swordsman of this rank has the right to not take off his hat when he sees a squire or a lord. However, this tradition was almost abandoned half a century ago. Below black iron swordsman, there was no position. Generally speaking, the strength of your garrison and militia are all at this stage, but there are some differences." "I see." Freya was enlightened. Previously, her vision was still constrained by the number one swordsman in the militia, but now it was broadened. But Seal wasn't done yet. He seemed to have seen through his lord's intention to nurture this girl, so he continued, "A black iron swordsman represents the first level of strength, 3 to 20 OZ. A silver swordsman represents the second level of strength, 20 to 100 OZ, and a gold swordsman represents the third level of strength, 100 to 500 OZ. We wizards correspond to intermediate wizards, first circle wizards and second circle wizards. Priests and other professions also have similar divisions. In fact, this division isn't based on a country or a family, but is strictly set by the Holy Cathedral of Fire." Freya and Roman could not help but blink. They did not know that there was so much logic behind this. However, these things weren't rare knowledge among the commoners, it was just that Bucci was too secluded. You must know that in those powerful empires such as Grus and Banco, the soldiers of the standing army are at least black iron, and the captains are almost all silver swordsmen. But in Erewhon, even the frontline soldiers of the border army are not at the level of black iron swordsmen, and even the captains of the night are only at the level of black iron. The Shire pointed out. The Shire, if word of this gets out, we will be beheaded. My lord, you are not afraid of being beheaded, so I, as a squire, am naturally not afraid. The young man cleverly replied, and he continued, my lord should be at the level of black iron swordsman, which is very rare for my lord's age. The Shire is very honored to be able to follow such an outstanding person. Brando thought to himself, not to mention the Reverend and the Chosen One, even those who were born with the talent of a knight were nothing. If his achievement was combined with the fact that he completed it in a few days, it would seem strange, but the Shire did not know this. However, it was still quite satisfying to have someone flatter him, and he was too lazy to expose them. Anyway, Roman and Freya's slightly surprised gazes made him feel quite proud, right? The Shire looked at the unconscious soldier on the ground and asked in a low voice, there seemed to be other prisoners in the 5th, 17th and 22nd cells. Should we release them to help us escape, my lord? If it's a military camp outside, the more people there are, the higher the chance of success. Freya immediately glared at this guy. What kind of rotten idea was this? Didn't Brando say that the prisoners here were those who had committed the most heinous crimes? There's no need for that. Too many people will only affect my plans. Brendel replied confidently. As you wish. Brando turned his head again. Roman, do you know where your aunt is? Roman shook his head. I don't know, but I heard that she will be staying at a cousin's house. Where does that cousin live? I know, in the Ponoan market. I heard from my aunt that the person seems to be a distant relative of Roman's aunt, a small woolen merchant called Hood. Freya replied. Brando looked at Roman. Your family has a merchant's tradition. The merchant girl smiled sweetly in return. Since they had determined the place to go, the next step was easy. The first floor of the dungeon under the military camp was smaller, and there was only one warden. Brando confirmed that the 4 wardens on the next floor were temporarily added because of them. After dealing with this floor, they continued to go up and arrived at the interior of the military camp. Brando was very familiar with this place. First, he took Freya's half-plate of the Wind Empress from the temporary storage, then he looted a sword from each of the prisoners and equipped them. It was a pity that there was no experience in knocking out the soldiers, otherwise Brando wouldn't mind waking them up and knocking them out a few more times. The Shire had suggested more than once to stir up the prisoners so that they could escape during the riot. The reason was simple, it would be easy for them to deal with 1 or 2 white main light infantry. But once they reached the courtyard outside, it would be difficult for the 4 of them to kill their way out. But Brando vetoed the idea. While they were talking, they had already sneaked into the top floor of the military camp. Brando opened the wooden door on the top floor of the tower and walked out. Outside was an open-air walkway with parapets on both sides for temporary defense. Brando didn't need to look to know that it was a tributary of the Song River in the city. From here he could see about 1/5 of the city. But he wasn't here to look at the scenery. Along the way they had knocked out 7 of the guards. According to the White Main Army's training, they would realize that something was amiss in about 10 minutes. Brando looked up at the sky. The moon was beautiful tonight, and even the thick clouds couldn't hide the silver disk in the night sky. What are you doing, Brando? Freya couldn't help but poke him from behind. She couldn't help but think that this guy didn't break out of prison just to see the moon. Although it was unlikely, but according to this guy's misdeeds, it wasn't impossible. She then looked at the Shire. The young man was also looking at the sky with his hands behind his back, not saying a word. The master and servant had a tacit understanding. The moon is beautiful tonight. Brando casually replied. Freya was so angry that she gritted her teeth. She really wanted to punch this guy's face and see if he could still smile. My aunt said that the moon's name is Luca. Luca was born because of Elaine. Elaine was Alice's sister, a twin goddess. Because of the moon, there are mysteries in this world. Roman looked up at the moon and said, Your aunt knows a lot, the Shire replied. This is a secret passed down among the wizards in this world. There is a book called The Epic of Darkness, and it describes the events that happened in the past. You mean that Roman's aunt is a wizard? Freya was stunned. Not necessarily, she is related to magic. Some of the witches in the countryside also know about this. the Shire replied. The girl with a long ponytail couldn't help but look at Roman, who was staring at the moon as if he didn't hear these words. But Freya thought that Aunt Jenny was indeed a bit mysterious. She often brought back strange things from the outside. The villagers all said that she was a witch and didn't have much contact with her family. But as Brendel listened to the three of them, a strange thought appeared in his mind. That's right. 16. The tower. The lost moon took away the light. He was stunned for a moment, thinking that he was hallucinating. He quickly shook his head, but he couldn't help but think of the dream he had when he was unconscious that night. In a quiet and dark environment, everything in the dream seemed bizarre and variegated. However, there was only a black moon, a dark lake, and a tall tower that stood quietly in the middle of it all throughout the dream. After that, he met Freya. But just as he thought of this, he heard the merchant girl staring at the moon and saying, "Something is coming, Brando." The rest of the three people raised their heads. After waiting for about 20 seconds, everyone present heard the low sound of flapping wings from the sky. But Freya was confused and uneasy, while Brando and the Shire didn't panic, especially Brando. He raised his head. The next moment, the gargoyle opened its wings and jumped out from the clouds under the moonlight. The winged stone demon in the bright moonlight, above the clouds, formed a mysterious composition in the eyes of the three people. "Brando, that's your gargoyle." Roman recognized it immediately. "Yes, are you afraid of heights?" Romaine quickly shook her head. What do you want, Brando?" Freya thought of something and her face turned pale. When the Golden Apple Lord barged into Burnley's house with a gloomy face, the honorary aristocrat, who claimed to be a big workshop owner and an industrialist, was looking at an exquisite brass armor with a magnifying glass. After all, an armor of the Year of Glory style was priceless in the hands of any collector. Burnley slowly kept the magnifying glass in his hand and looked at his companion. He teased, "What's wrong? Did that guy bring people out of the city?" "It's not that serious, it's just that the prisoners escaped tonight." Escobar couldn't help but get angry when he mentioned this. Actually, he wasn't angry about this, he was angry about the madman who came to his house and shouted at him. "That's just a small matter, how did they escape?" "That's not what I'm angry about." The Golden Apple Lord shook his head and took a deep breath. "What I'm angry about is that the Tiger Luke Besson of the White Mane Army came to me and said that I locked up a descendant of a Highland Knight in his dungeon and that I was trying to cause trouble for him." "A Highland Knight?" Burnley was stunned. "Yes, he said that one of the three prisoners was a Highland Knight. Also, his mage squire was with him. Oh my God, he actually came to me to ask for that person. He said that I can't touch that person and that he must get him into his group." The Golden Apple Lord was furious at the mention of this. "And the result?" The result is that I have to bring people to settle this matter. It's the middle of the night, that guy is too much." He replied in a bad mood. "Don't be impulsive, let Grantham handle this matter. I'll get some people from my private army to help you." Burnley replied with a smile. The Golden Apple Lord looked at him gratefully. For the first time he didn't feel that the round face was so annoying. But he thought for a while and reminded, "Actually, I'm here for another matter. I heard that you recently shipped a batch of armor into the city? You have to be careful. Although it's not a big deal to cultivate your own forces, you have to be careful not to let others use it against you." He couldn't help but look into the house. "It's just a hobby." The businessman replied with a smile. "P.S. Strange, why do I feel like my results are so bad?" Chapter 56. Brando and his squire dismounted from the gargoyle and saw Roman and Freya's pale face in the alley, especially the latter who was glaring at him hatefully. But he found it funny that the goddess of war was afraid of heights. When he thought of her pale face in the sky, she was no different from the girls in his previous team. "All right, I'll explain the current situation." Brando was afraid that Freya would settle the score with him, so he spoke first. Freya saw through his trick and lightly snorted. She turned her head away, too lazy to argue with him. "We have already delivered the news, whether they accept it or not is up to the nobles. What we need to do now is to find Roman's aunt and escape from Fortress Reeden before Madara attacks. But that won't be easy." Brando waved his hand and had the gargoyle fly up to the roof to observe the surroundings. He had been experimenting with talisman incantations since night fell, and finally found one that he could use. But he was still lacking an offensive incantation. "Freya and Roman are registered militia, so your relatives in Fortress Reeden must have a record. If we contact Roman's distant relative, we might run the risk of being discovered. especially when we don't know if the other party is reliable. Then won't Aunt Jenny be in danger? Freya turned her head and asked. Brando glanced at Roman. The latter didn't say a word and was playing with his clothes. Overall, the enemy has some time to react, but if we move like a swarm of bees, the chances of failure will be higher. To save time, we need to split into 3 groups and confirm what each of us should do. He took a deep breath and subconsciously brought out the demeanor of a team leader in the game. But in the real world, Brando couldn't help but feel a little nervous when he was in charge of other people's lives. His gaze paused on the 3 of them and he pointed out, Freya, contact Roman's relatives. Me? Freya pointed at herself in surprise. Yes. But I only know that he lives in Panuo Market. I don't even know the exact number. Besides, I don't even know where Panuo and Market is. The ponytailed girl looked troubled. You can ask. The Ponoan Market is nearby. There's a bar called Red Copper Dragon Story Club, after you walk out of this alley. You can go there and ask for information. Brando suddenly smiled. But be careful. The mercenaries in the bar have dirty hands and feet. Don't get taken advantage of. Freya's face flushed red and she glared at him fiercely. You? Shameless. The Shire chuckled at the side, thinking that his lord was quite interesting. It was rare for nobles to visit such a vulgar place like a bar, but it seemed like he was very familiar with the kingdom's affairs. Wizards always liked to hang out with smart people, especially those who were knowledgeable. Of course, this young man was no exception. After you find that woolen merchant called Hood, don't reveal your identity. Give him a time and ask him to meet us at the bar. You have to pay attention to his reaction and you will know if he is reliable. If you find traces of the army, don't worry. Before they know our relationship, they will not act rashly and alert the enemy. They will also want to have a chance to catch us all in one fell swoop. Freya thought for a while, as if to confirm if she could do it, and then nodded. What about me, Brando? Roman blinked and asked. Roman, help us contact a carriage and wait for us at the north gate. There are only 2 hostels in Fortress Reeden, so they might be monitored. If you find something wrong with one of them, change to the other. If there is something wrong with both of them, go to the north gate alone. No matter what, we will leave when the gate opens at dawn. If we are lucky, we might be able to leave before the lockdown order is issued. Romain nodded straightforwardly. Then Brando took out the money he got from the noble's belongings and divided it into 2 portions. Both of you might need money for your actions. Here are 30 silver coins, half for each of you is more than enough. If possible, Roman, you can buy some food as well. Romain nodded seriously. What about you, Brando? Freya asked. You will be under a lot of pressure if you act alone. The White Mane army might intervene at any time. The Shire and I will go visit a few old friends to attract the attention of the guards in Fortress Reeden. Brando replied calmly. Only the heavens knew how much determination Brando put into this sentence. His belief was that he could control the risks, just like when he passed through Xavier's mountain pass. That was because he was confident that he could guarantee the safety of Roman and himself. He never thought of himself as a savior or a hero. Even a meticulous plan has the possibility of failure, not to mention the probability of success when you stake everything on a single throw. This sentence was given to Brando by his old leader in the game, and it was also his motto. But this time even he didn't know how big the risk was, but he had promised Roman and Butchie. As a man, sometimes he needed to be stubborn. Brando felt a kind of motivation that made his blood boil, supporting him to calm down and complete this task to fulfill his promise. You're crazy, Brando. Freya heard the hidden meaning in his words and stared at him with wide eyes. You will be hanged, what do you want us to do? She suddenly felt that her words were ambiguous and explained with a red face. What I mean is, I don't want to be a bandit with you. Brando suddenly felt that this girl who didn't mean what she said was a little cute. It's okay, he said. I will invite you to join us if there's a chance. He thought that there would be a chance, but how confident was he to convince the future goddess of war? There's no chance, Freya said bitterly. You and Roman should go together, I'm worried about her. No need, I believe in the little Roman. Romaine raised her eyebrows, secretly happy. Freya was so angry that she gritted her teeth. She thought that this guy knew that she was worried about him, but he just had to force her to say it. What was even more infuriating was that even if she said it, he wouldn't listen. Forget it, I'm too lazy to care about you. She lowered her head and used her hand to push her ponytail behind her back. You be careful. Romaine gave him a small, everything is okay hand signal and even waved it around. This was something she learned from Brando in the past 2 days. I'll wait for you at the north gate, Brando. The future merchant's carriage will only move once Brando is in it. Brando's heart skipped a beat when he heard this and smiled. About 10 minutes later, in the White Mane Army's barracks. You said you didn't hear anything? Luke Besson picked up a broken piece of wood and pointed at it. From the degree of shattering, it's at least at the level of a first-rank warrior. A black steel swordsman broke through our White Mane Army's prison and you tell me you didn't hear anything? Luke Besson, who was known as the Tiger, was 45 years old this year. His skin was dark and his forehead was sharp as if it was carved by a knife. His high cheekbones were half of the mountain people's bloodline. His cheeks were flat and skinny, and his deep eyes had a hint of wildness. Luke Besson had been promoted to the 104th Swordsman Regiment commander for 10 years. If he wanted to be promoted, he would have to rely on his reputation and experience in the army. However, Luke Besson was politically inclined towards the Everton faction, which was the so-called Revival Party. Furthermore, it was a fact that the White Mane Army had already completed the process of privatizing Count Pulla, and he was no longer welcomed in the army. But this didn't stop him from showing off his authority in front of his subordinates. Tiger, Luke Besson was not one of those nobles who got in through the back door. The general's words immediately made the few officers look at each other, especially the one who was on duty tonight. His face turned red. White Mane infantrymen wearing randy uniforms and pointed helmets walked in and out of the room. Compared to the guards, the biggest difference in their uniforms was the white wolf feather hanging down from their epaulets. This unique ornament was to commemorate the glory of the White Mane Army during the Battle of Jadens. It was also how the White Mane Army got its name. If the opponent is a Highland knight, his acolytes would be able to do the same. Someone said. To the White Mane Army, the important thing isn't what your opponent did. The important thing is what you did. 10 minutes of reaction time. Are you a militia? Luke Besson's reprimand made everyone speechless. At this moment, a military officer entered the room with his attendant. He held a sheepskin parchment in his hand and reported, "Commander, we have checked the information of the Bucci militia. There are indeed people named Freya and Roman in the records, but the young man named Brando doesn't seem to be from Bucci." Luke Besson was not surprised. He tapped the table with his finger and asked, "And then?" The attendant walked closer and whispered something in his ear. Luke Besson nodded. He asked again, "What is the attitude of the king's messenger?" The count did not say clearly, but it seems like he is hinting for us to execute him on the spot. The military officer replied. Luke Besson was slightly stunned. The king's messenger would go against a commoner? He rubbed his chin, trying to decipher the hidden meaning, but before he could do that, the whole room was already buzzing with discussion. Is that so? But why would that old man go with a commoner? I think he is interested in those two women, that old pervert. A jester, I saw him admiring the elven sword with my own eyes. A country bumpkin who has never seen the world. Someone sneered. Luke Besson immediately slammed the table to stop the messy military officers. Just as he was about to reprimand them, another person pushed the door open. It was the messenger outside. "Commander, the local parliament is on fire." "What a good diversion," Luke Besson could not help but curse. He immediately stood up and ordered, "I will give you 10 minutes to gather the 2nd and 3rd squadrons as soon as possible." Rows of military officers stood up. He then pointed to the other side, "The two of you, go and monitor the target. Maquilin, your mission is the hostile. You know what to do, don't alert the enemy." The three people who were called out lowered their heads and did not dare to hesitate. They immediately turned around and left. "Commander, what about Lord Cyber?" "No need to remind him. Those fellows must be running off to court the king's emissaries, and they must be on one side or the other, don't they?" The commander's words made the room filled with low laughter. P.S. Chongqing has become a rural area. There is no electricity every day, and the electricity only came back at 7 today. Seeing so many people saying that 2 chapters a day is too slow, I have the urge to vomit blood. Please vote. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.